Thank you. That concludes topical questions. The next item of business is a debate on motion 16750 in the name of Shirley Ann Somerville on supporting households with cost of living pressures and rising energy bills. And I invite members who wish to speak in the debate to press their request to speak buttons. And I call on the Cabinet Secretary to speak to and move the motion up to 15 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer, and I move the motion in my name. I welcome the opportunity to open this debate on supporting households with ongoing cost of living pressures. As the motion notes, Ofgem's recent energy price cap hike is the third increase in a row. That's 9.4% or £159 higher than this time last year. This once again emphasises the relevance and the importance of these issues to the people across Scotland. Presiding Officer, I also want to take a moment to add further context for all of us in the Chamber. Last week we read news reports, and indeed more again this morning, about the Labour UK Government's planned £6 billion cut to welfare spending, turbocharged austerity, Presiding Officer, on the backs of some of our most vulnerable constituents. Let me be very clear, the Scottish Government will never accept this, and we are calling urgently on the UK Government to scrap these plans ahead of the spring statement later this month, and I certainly hope that Labour MSPs and their leader will join me in that call. Presiding Officer, the foremost priority of this Government is ending child poverty in Scotland, and I strongly reiterate that commitment in the Chamber today. Poverty limits a child's opportunity, their health and their well-being. And the ongoing cost of living crisis is only worsening the poverty premium facing those at the sharpest end. But we know that the reality is that this affects many people in their daily lives, even those on middle incomes. As a result, this Government continues to take immediate action through our budget, with more than £3 billion to tackle poverty and to help with the cost of living crisis for households. This package spans a range of support for energy bills, childcare, health and travel, as well as social security payments that are either not available elsewhere in the UK or are more generous. As the First Minister has said, this budget delivers the things that make the difference to people today, and it lays the foundation for a hopeful future in which Scotland can grow and further prosper. Now, our interventionist approach to delivery addresses the issues that have a direct and an immediate impact, day in, day out, on the families in Scotland. That begins with essentials: food, warm, safe homes, good jobs and money in people's pockets. The budget is about investing in the people of Scotland and our communities. And as many families struggle with the cost of living and soaring energy bills, our budget provides immediate support for day-to-day costs. It commits more than £6.9 billion for benefits expenditure, almost £1.3 billion more than the UK Government gives to the Scottish Government for social security. Within that, £644 million of our package of payments is available only here in Scotland. Now, that is essential support, such as the Scottish Child Payment, which puts money directly into the pockets of low-income families. And we know how important certainty is in addressing competing household costs, and that's why I was pleased to attend the Social Justice and Social Security Committee just last week to confirm in law the annual uprating of benefits in line with inflation. This coming financial year, we will also invest £768 million to boost delivery through the Affordable Housing Supply Programme. We estimate that this will support the delivery of at least 8,000 affordable homes. But stakeholders, including the Joseph Rowntree Foundation, have highlighted that the biggest pressure on household bills is rising rents. And while this Government is doing what we can by introducing measures like rent controls in our upcoming housing bill, the Labour UK Government continues to drag its feet on critical measures like the local housing allowance. Certainly.
Patrick Harvey.
It does. I'm grateful for the intervention, but it does sound as though the Cabinet Secretary's argument would be a justification for opposing what they intend to do to the housing bill, because the Government's amendments intend to lock in above-inflation rent rises everywhere, even where there's a rent control area in place. Will they, even at this late stage, change direction and think again on that?
Cabinet Secretary.
I appreciate the work that Patrick Harvey has done on this issue over many years. I would say on this point I would fundamentally disagree with him on this part of the proposal. And the reason for that is we do feel it's important to have that cap there, as we will introduce amendments on. But we also think it's exceptionally important to give certainty to the private rented sector and to private developers, because we need to ensure continued investment in Scotland. And there is a balance we absolutely do need to strike. So I am absolutely committed to the delivery of rent controls, but I think it's also very important that as a government we support the private rented sector landlords and also private developers who seek to invest in Scotland. Presiding Officer, the Minister for Housing has written to the Secretary of State calling for the allowance freeze to be scrapped in the upcoming spring statement, and I certainly hope that Labour members will again join us on that call too. The budget again helps to tackle the housing emergency by supporting immediate actions that will return existing housing stock to use and will also increase acquisitions. We will also invest an additional £4 million to enable local authorities, frontline services and relevant partners to prepare for the new homelessness prevention duties. And because the best and most sustainable route out of poverty is good employment, we are also investing up to £90 million in the delivery of devolved employability services. That includes specific funding to continue supporting parents towards, into and to sustain employment, and to embed child poverty coordinators in our local authorities. We are investing more than £2.6 billion to support public transport and make our transport systems available, affordable and accessible to all. And this will help to connect parents to employment, training and skills opportunities and the services that they need to navigate their way out of poverty. It also includes £415 million for concessionary bus travel, which enables access to free bus travel for 2.3 million people across Scotland. And of course, we are continuing to expand the provision of free school meals so that more children can benefit. Overall, we will invest around £40 million to expand meals to children in receipt of the Scottish Child Payment in primary 6 and 7, and to trial an expansion for those in S1 to S3 in 8 local authority areas. Over 25,000 more children will benefit from this support. And of course, the budget for local government this year provides record funding of over £15 billion, one of the largest increases in funding in recent times, and indeed the local government settlement will have increased by over £1 billion when compared with 24-25, including funding allocated for this year's pay deals. Presiding Officer, this government has also acted decisively to lower household costs. In November, I announced the Scottish Government would invest a further £20 million in the Scottish Welfare Fund's budget to be distributed to councils in the current financial year. That increase is helping councils meet increased demand on the fund and providing vital support to people who are in crisis. I also confirmed that we would invest an additional £20 million in the Warmer Homes Scotland scheme, which is our national fuel poverty scheme, taking the total investment in the scheme to £85 million in the current financial year. The scheme focuses on long-term sustainable measures, and that additional funding will help around 1,500 additional households to install energy efficiency measures and more efficient heating systems. And, Presiding Officer, I announced in November that I will bring forward regulations to introduce in winter 25-26 a universal pension age winter heating payment of at least £100 for every Scottish pensioner household, with those in receipt of a relevant low-income benefit receiving £200 or £300 depending on their age. That universal benefit will provide much-needed support that is not available elsewhere in the UK, and it will apply to all Scottish pensioner households, as we always intended to before the UK Government's cruel and undignified decision to cut the winter fuel payment for those more vulnerable pensioners in our society. So let me be clear once again, when Westminster chose to stand by as energy bills rocketed and chose to rip away vital support like the winter fuel payment, this government took action and we have delivered. And, Presiding Officer, today we will go further. Today I am announcing more investment to ensure that families get the help they need it when they need it. In the year ahead, we will make up to just over £2.1 million available to continue our support for the WISE Group's Relationship Mentoring Programme. This will allow the WISE Group to provide vital wraparound support to around 2,000 families that not only helps them address immediate needs, but also helps to make longer-term improvements in their lives. Presiding Officer, we know that our action is making a difference, helping to improve the lives and outcomes of households across Scotland. However, our efforts are being undermined by the policies of the UK Government, not least the two-child cap. That is why we will develop the systems necessary to scrap the impact of the two-child cap in 2026, with CPAG forecasting that scrapping the two-child cap in Scotland could lift 15,000 children out of poverty. Presiding Officer, the Tory two-child cap is now the Labour two-child cap, and it will be the Scottish Government that will deliver for the people of Scotland and rid them of this despicable policy. It is frankly unforgivable that the Labour Party is standing idly by while children are pushed into poverty every single day because of this policy. We are also continuing our child winter heating payment, which last year provided £7.8 million to support more than 33,000 children, young people and their families who had higher energy needs due to disability or a health condition. That benefit is not available elsewhere in the UK. In total, this coming winter, we expect to invest more than £65 million in our 3 winter heating benefits, providing vital support with energy bills to more than 630,000 people. All of those programmes providing vital support. If I have time, Presiding Officer?
Concur.
Vitally important, of course, in terms of supporting families in Scotland is work. So Dundee University have announced this afternoon that over 600 jobs will go at the university because of the £35 million deficit the university has. What part of responsibility do Scottish ministers have for the situation that Dundee University is in and other universities in Scotland are in on account of their particular education policies towards universities?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, Presiding Officer, if Mr Kerr has read the statement from the university, they have set out some of the reasons behind that policy. Now, I do disagree with Mr Kerr. I believe in free education. I'm sorry that he doesn't, but that is a predictable response from the Scottish Conservatives. But as he knows, universities are independent institutions of government, and Mr Kerr should be careful about suggesting that the Scottish Government should interfere in the day-to-day running of a university. Sorry,
Cabinet Secretary. Mr Kerr, I know that you are aware that you should not be shouting from your seat. Cabinet Secretary.
Well, I'm afraid once again, Presiding Officer, Mr Kerr is just demonstrating that he isn't actually interested in the people of Scotland that are suffering from the cost of living crisis at all. He's not apologetic for the austerity that was delivered by successive UK governments, including that of his party, but is now being turbocharged by Labour. Nor is he apologetic for the rising energy costs, nor thinking that anything should be done about it. This government certainly is. But it is very, very disappointing that we are seeing those energy costs further increasing. That is not what the electorate were expecting when they were voting Labour, and it's certainly not what they were promised. Presiding Officer, we know that over 53% of fuel-poor households in Scotland are in extreme fuel poverty, which means spending more than 20% of their household income on energy. That's wholly unacceptable in the age of renewables and in a Scotland that is an energy-rich nation. But the fundamental shift and the action that is required lies with the Scottish Government. Despite the policies that I have underlined today that we are implementing, there is so much needs to be done in the UK Parliament. That's why we need to see urgent market reform and community benefit. We have to recognise and act on the direct link between some of our most vulnerable constituents experiencing high energy costs and facing deeper poverty. Exacerbating existing inequalities by stripping away the support that was there is pushing more and more people into that poverty and making that poverty deeper. The Scottish Government is determined and is delivering for people in Scotland with their energy bills as much as we can. But, Presiding Officer, there is a limit to how much we can continue to mitigate against the UK Government. If Mr Lumsden will apologise, I'm just about to wind up. My apologies. there is only so far that we can go in mitigating against the worst excesses of Westminster. The Scottish Government has already spent £154 million this year alone on mitigating against welfare decisions, and that's just the welfare decisions, Presiding Officer. As I set out at the start, the planned further cuts that are coming ahead in the spring budget statement from the Chancellor are deeply concerning for people right across this nation. So we have to, as a Parliament, make sure that we are doing all we can within our powers to ensure that we are protecting people during the cost of living crisis. But, Presiding Officer, we also have the opportunity today to stand together to make a call on the UK Government before the spring statement not to deliver those welfare cuts, to actually deliver some support for people that are suffering from those high energy prices, and for the UK Government to deliver on the promises that they were elected to. And I move the motion in my name, Presiding Officer.
Thank you, Cabinet Secretary. Members will wish to be aware that there is time in hand this afternoon, and I call on Liz Smith to speak to and move Amendment 16750.3.
Thank you, and can I move the amendment in my name? Presiding Officer, in recent days, as a nation, I think we have rightly been consumed by the news coming from Washington, by the utterly unacceptable and bullying rhetoric of the Trump administration as it tries to undermine the established relationships within the Western world and to hamper moves towards peace in Ukraine after 3 long years of war. And as we watched on aghast at what was unfolding on our television screens, the Governor of the Bank of England, Andrew Bailey, was giving evidence to the Treasury Select Committee. He was warning of another American attack on our Western economies through trade wars. The impending tariffs placed by America on Canada, Mexico and China have already triggered retaliatory responses, and the Governor was extremely blunt about the detrimental effects on Britain's economy should these trade wars escalate further, most especially in terms of new global inflationary pressures and on productivity growth. Exactly what we do not need at the same time as the ongoing cost of living pressures and rising energy bills, which, from a constituency mailbag point of view, is probably still what worries people the most. Now, the Cabinet Secretary mentioned at the start that since October, we've seen the energy price cap rise 3 times in a row, 10% in October, 1% in January and 6.4% in April, with the result that the annual bill for a household using a typical amount of gas and electricity will go up to £1,849 per year, which is an increase of £111. These are worrying times, and that's even before we come to the politics of it all. And I dare say, for the purposes of this debate, we will have to come to the politics of it. But I do want to see the bigger picture in all of this. So the Labour government is still promising to cut energy bills by £300 by 2030. Now, that's a statistic that has been widely disputed by economic analysts, and it certainly doesn't fit very well with Labour's decision to remove the winter fuel payment as a universal benefit to pensioners. That significant cutback of the winter fuel payment meant that just 130,000 older Scots received the winter fuel payment this winter, with approximately another 900,000 older Scots losing out during the winter. And Labour put that down to the need for a debate about priorities and universalism. Now, that part is right. There is an extremely important debate to be had about the principle of universal benefits, particularly when there is no fiscal sustainability in the foreseeable future. Indeed, I have been arguing about this for many months. But if we are to have that debate, the principles that we must be applying must have regard to those most in need and to a strong evidence base about which policies have the most effective effects in terms of mitigating poverty and vulnerability. And I have to say, when it comes to Labour's policy on winter fuel, that falls foul on both these counts. Now, it is these criteria of examining vulnerability and substantiating evidence which should challenge this Parliament. For example, I have said several times in the Chamber that I believe that the Scottish Government's policy on the Scottish Child Payment is effective and obviously well received. But there are other aspects where the evidence on welfare benefits is much less clear, and where the pressures of the welfare spend, I will in a minute, where the pressures of the welfare spend are such that they are now way out of the Scottish Government budget. And I will say again that it's all very well having a social contract with the people of Scotland until you find that you can't afford it, and because its priority means that other aspects of policy making can't be undertaken.
Cabinet Secretary.
What I'm about to say is helpful because we've been advocating for quite some time for there to be a social tariff on fuel bills, because I personally believe that actually tackling this issue at source is the way to make long-term differences and to make sure that we don't have to have universal benefits in place to fill in the gaps and mitigate the costs of electricity and gas and indeed welfare cuts. But I'm not sure on the Scottish Conservatives' position on the social tariff at source for vulnerable consumers.
Liz Smith.
On record that we support that, but the key point that I'm trying to get across is that we must have an evidence base to what works best. And one of the reasons why that tariff might work best is for exactly what the Cabinet Secretary has said, is at source. But when it comes to the overall perspective on universal policies, we cannot afford to do everything that we would like to do. That's the point. And therefore, to make judgments about what we should be doing, we have to examine what the evidence is in terms of effectiveness, but we also have to look at the greatest vulnerability. That's the problem that the Labour UK government is coming under at the moment, because that welfare benefit, just as the Scottish government is finding out, we can't afford to do everything that we would like to do. And I think that's the realistic perception that we have got to understand when it comes to setting policies in this place. Now, as Conservatives, we're always getting criticised for being obsessed with economic growth, but I will reject that assertion on two counts. Economic growth is essential because it leads to more jobs, better pay, lower poverty rates and to better education. But secondly, because economic growth is essential to welfare and to a feel-good factor amongst businesses and industry. We're also getting criticised about Liz Truss, rightly so. But Liz Truss's fault was not her aspiration to deliver economic growth, but because she failed to take advice of the financial institutions and failed to interpret correctly the market trends. And that's something that I think should be a lesson for the Trump administration just now, particularly if you look at the papers today, as the markets have had a considerable shake in that respect. So it was that refusal to listen to the advice that was so unforgivable and which did damage to the UK economy at a critical time. But that did not mean, and it does not mean now, that the aspiration for economic growth was the wrong principle. And that's where, obviously, we took issue with the SNP's recent budget, which entrenched the high tax agenda without any signs of the ability to deliver the better public services. And it's all very well to say that the lowest paid in Scotland have seen their taxes reduced to the tune of the princely sum of £2 a month, which I don't think is going to be much use to them. But the fact of the matter is that the middle to higher earners are being squeezed beyond their means, and it is that which is causing businesses in Scotland to be very concerned about some aspects of recruitment and the increase. Yes, of course, Mr Mason, just a minute. And of the increasing tax differential with the rest of the UK. And I'm quite sure that's why the Deputy First Minister has expressed her concerns about the persistent rise in tax. Mr Mason.
John Mason.
Member for giving way. She talks about this being a high-tax economy, but would she accept that in a country like Denmark, taxes are considerably higher and public services are considerably better?
Well, I think having visited some of these countries, the delivery of public services is an awful lot better than it is in Scotland. And one of the great problems that the Scottish Government is facing just now is that if you were going to have a high tax agenda, the reason behind that would surely have to be that you're going to deliver better public services, but that is simply not the case at the moment, and that's a serious issue for most people. And of course, we know too that in every two of our small businesses, the most reported obstacles to the successes of business, it's not just about the high tax agenda, but it's to the question of increases in energy prices. 62% of small businesses said that. It's about taxation, VAT, PAYE national insurance, a half of businesses are now, not surprisingly, complaining about that. And 2/3 of businesses surveyed said that the Scottish Government's income tax policy had a huge impact on their business, and the construction industry was the one that was being impacted the most. So these policies, namely that high tax agenda and low growth, they're not going to help to address the cost of living pressures, but they will exacerbate them. So if the SNP keeps on having an idea about having a high tax agenda, then quite frankly that's not going to address the concerns that we have. And of course, to make matters worse, the SNP budget came in conjunction with the Labour budget, which was also intent on damaging the economy by pursuing the wealth creators of the UK, punishing them with increasing national insurance contributions, a tax on jobs, and that is causing very considerable increases in what business has to cope with just now. Now, both Labour and the SNP they talk a great deal about supporting the economy of the future, and they're right to do so, whether that's to life sciences or financial services, new technologies and AI. But they do the exact opposite when it comes to oil and gas, and I know my colleague Douglas Lumsden will expand in full on that in his contribution. But there is also housing, and we've had many debates, the housing ministers in the chamber this afternoon, we've had many debates about housing. And I do think the Cabinet Secretary sitting beside the Housing Minister was arguing quite rightly about trying to address things at source. Housing is one way that you can do that. And the current statistics, which we had rehearsed, I think, in question time just before this debate, they spell out just the extent of the challenge that we've got when it comes to housing. Presiding Officer, I began my contribution with reference to the international situation, because I firmly believe it is a hugely important backdrop to the economic circumstances in which we find ourselves. Now, some of these circumstances are well beyond our control, but that makes it even more important that in Scotland, both the UK and the Scottish Governments work together to address the issues which concern our voters the most: their jobs, their family budgets, the delivery of effective public services. It's no secret at all that the Scottish Conservatives believe that recent budgets have confirmed that both governments are moving in the wrong direction, because there isn't sufficient focus on growth or on lowering the tax burden and removing the barriers to business which stifle entrepreneurship and innovation. Leave it there.
Thank you. And I now call Paul O'Kane to speak to and move Amendment 16750.4.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer, and I move the amendment in my name. I'm pleased to follow Liz Smith, and although I didn't agree with everything in her speech, as colleagues may have guessed, I do think she made some very important and serious points, as she always does in her contributions to the Chamber. And I do believe she will be missed when she leaves this Parliament at the election next year. And it's the first opportunity I've had to say that to Liz Smith, so I just wanted to put that on the record as we begin our debate this afternoon. And I think a lot of what Liz Smith said about the seriousness of this debate and the seriousness of these issues is very important and very pertinent. And there can be no more important issues we debate in this chamber than the cost of living crisis and the pressure that it puts on the people that we all seek to represent. And so, Presiding Officer, I am slightly disappointed that the tone of the government motion does seem somewhat unserious, I think, in many of these respects, because I think what it has done and what we've seen in recent weeks is a return to the sort of grudge and grievance politics and the grudge and grievance debates in this chamber that we had been all too familiar with in the earlier years of this Parliament. Because when the new UK Labour government came to power last summer, we were very clear that we didn't want to play our part in that grudge and grievance and that squabbling. And actually, it was about coming together and trying to work together to further improve the lives of the people of Scotland. And I think there have been some very positive steps in that regard, particularly in the field of energy and energy security, and working together to try and tackle the challenges of energy prices. And I want to be clear that I do welcome an opportunity, I think, to discuss what more we can do across the UK and in this place to ensure that we support people who, as I say, are all of our constituents and the people we represent, to be supported to continue as they struggle through the cost of living crisis. And of course, we can't get away from the context in which we meet this afternoon. We know that many of the shocks that the energy market have experienced are as a result of the full-scale invasion of Ukraine and the challenges that exist therein, as have been outlined already in this debate today, not least the volatile reaction of world leaders, not least President Trump, and the ongoing issues that the Prime Minister and others are having to deal with on an international scale. I'll give way to Douglas Lumsden.
Douglas Lumsden.
Paul O'Kane for giving way. He mentions things like Ukraine and what that does to our energy security. Does that not make the case even more that we should be producing our own oil and gas while we still have that demand to increase to our energy security?
Paul O'Kane.
Well, I'm very grateful to Douglas Lumsden for that intervention, and he knows that I believe in an energy mix and that we have to ensure that we continue to use the resources that we have, and indeed that we have to open up the potential for that just transition away from oil and gas, because that's vitally important. But also we have to take opportunities in terms of all of the resources that are available to Scotland, not least nuclear as well, and I will say something about that in my speech as I progress. And whilst Ukraine, of course, is a huge part of the context, we can't get away from the actions of the previous UK government. And Liz Smith referenced Liz Truss, because I feel she knew it was going to come up in the contributions this afternoon, because Liz Truss's mini-budget, we continue to live with the effects of those decisions that were taken without due consideration to the impact that it would then have on borrowing rates and on the general finances and the economy. And we are still living with those shocks. And we can absolutely argue the point about the inheritance that this UK government has had, but we cannot get away with the fact that those decisions are having a knock-on impact as we meet here today. So I said I'll give way to Stephen Kerr and then I'll make some progress.
Stephen Kerr.
We can also accept, though, that there is a shock contained within the October budget of last year, a shock which is delayed, but we will begin to feel as of next month, when it is reported that hundreds of thousands of businesses are planning to let people go because of the tax increases that are being forced on them by Paul O'Kane's Labour government. There is an aftershock from Rachel Reeves' October budget, isn't there?
Paul O'Kane.
I'm not going to take a lecture on tax from the Conservatives, who ensured the highest tax burden for working people in over a generation. And these issues have been well debated in this chamber. And if Mr Kerr would have made different decisions, then we would have been in a very different place. And the £5.2 billion that came to Scotland would not, in fact, be available. So I said at the outset of my contribution that I felt this was a fundamentally unserious motion, and I feel that because the government want to pretend that absolutely no work has been done by a new UK Labour government to begin to tackle these issues and to look at them in a serious way and in detail. And I do think we have to just take a moment to reflect on the actions that have been taken. I think we should all welcome the recent announcement by the UK Labour Government that it is expanding the £150 warm home discount scheme so that 220,000 more Scottish households will receive help to reduce their energy costs. That scheme provides energy bill support to those who are most in need, and the result of that UK Labour Government intervention will mean that 1 in every 5 families in Scotland are now eligible for help with their bills. That's a total of 500,000 households. And not just expanding that lifeline scheme, but also delivering the extra £41 million through consequentials to the Household Support Fund in order to continue to provide support. And the Cabinet Secretary and I had many debates over that, because it took quite some time to understand what the government's plans were for that Barnett consequential and the difference that it can make in terms of supporting people here in Scotland. I've already mentioned in my exchange with Stephen Kerr the £5.2 billion that have been given to the Scottish budget in terms of the budgetary decisions that were taken at a UK level, which has sought to end a period of Conservative decline, quite frankly, and in action. I'm conscious there's time available, so I will give way to Ben McPherson.
Ben McPherson.
I thank Paul O'Kane for giving way. In previous debates and exchanges, Paul O'Kane has spoken with passion about the need to support disabled people through the social security system. And talking about Barnett consequentials, what is the Scottish Labour Party's view on the proposed potential cuts to disability benefits by the UK Government, which will have a consequential effect on the Scottish Government's available resources?
Paul O'Kane.
Well, Mr McPherson used 2 very telling words there, which are proposed and potential. I don't know the detail of I don't know the detail of the Green Paper. Perhaps members on the benches obviously do. What I do know, and we debated this last week, is that there is a very important discussion to be had. I'll just finish this point, if the Cabinet Secretary will allow me. There's a very important discussion to be had about the fact that the social security system is not working and it is broken, and that we do have to invest in supporting people who want to work, but face too many barriers to work, to get into work, because I do think that that is a very important part of ensuring that people can receive an adequate income. I'll take the Cabinet Secretary.
Cabinet Secretary. Can I thank the member for taking intervention? I also agree that we should support people into work. What the question from Mr McPherson was alluding to, though, is before Mr O'Kane knows the final details of what's in that paper, would he like to put on record now what he thinks the UK Government should do, and would he back the calls to ensure that we are protecting disabled people, particularly those on child disability, adult disability, from any cuts from the UK Labour Government? Paul O'Kane.
The Cabinet Secretary perhaps didn't hear me say that I believe that we have to invest in supporting people who want to work to get into work. I mean, you need to reform the system firstly. And secondly, on ADP, because the Cabinet Secretary and I have had this debate, we do know that there is £1 billion overspend in terms of block grant adjustments already in the system, which we were having to have a debate about. Indeed, I think for the first time last week at committee, the Cabinet Secretary acknowledged the challenge within that, and it is a stark situation, and we do have to look at Social Security Scotland and how it is working and how it can work more efficiently in terms of its systems. So, Presiding Officer, I think it's clear that there are multiple interventions that have been made since this UK Government came into office, but I do think there is challenges as well, because we have the Scottish Government wanting to ignore the fact that they have a responsibility in terms of ensuring that energy mix that I talk about, which can provide more sustainability, more self-sufficiency and bring down bills. We have the long-standing aversion and opposition to nuclear power, as I've already referenced in my comments today. We know that there are planning approvals waiting for Berwick Bank on desks. I'll just finish, if the Cabinet Secretary allows me. I think I am rapidly running out of time.
It's up to, of course, to the member. I would advise there is quite a bit of time in hand,
okay,
but it's up to the member.
If the Cabinet Secretary will allow me, because she might want to respond to this point. The delays on Berwick Bank, for example, which has sat in ministers' desks for years, the failure to deliver on their commitment to their own publicly owned energy company, and selling off the seabed on the cheap in the latest round of ScotWind options. Perhaps Gillian Martin may wish to comment on some of that.
Cabinet Secretary Gillian Martin.
I don't really want to comment because I was making an intervention on Paul O'Kane, but it was really to ask him a question. Will more nuclear power generated in Scotland bring down the bills of people in Scotland?
Paul O'Kane.
Well, I think keeping the lights on is an important point for the people. Well, so I think the Cabinet Secretary shouted at me from a secondary position. She couldn't answer any of the questions I put to her, but I'm trying to say that ensuring that we have a strong energy mix, we keep the lights on, I actually think is important to bill payers and will, in fact, keep bills down. So I think it really is time the Government considered their position on many of these issues. And since the general election, we have seen a UK Labour Government starting that long-term work to secure our energy future and the energy market. Last week, we saw the announcement of funding for the expansion of the Port of Cromarty Firth so it can make floating offshore wind turbines on site, the first time in the UK. We've seen recent proposals just yesterday set out to reduce energy rates for communities that accept the need for new and upgraded pylons near them to ensure that the communities benefit from the infrastructure that is going to be absolutely necessary to build in order to ensure that energy sufficiency. And those are just some examples of, as I say, the importance of ensuring our energy security, which can bring down bills in the long term, which is what this Labour Government pledged to do. But the Cabinet Secretary in her opening and Les Smith have touched on the wider issues that exist, I think, in terms of cost of living. And it was very welcome, I must say, to hear that extra funding that will be provided to the WISE Group, because I met with the WISE Group just last week to discuss many of these issues. And they said to me that actually fuel poverty cannot be unique from general poverty and from the work that we have to do more widely in order to tackle poverty in all of its facets. So yes, there is a discussion, of course, on what we do about energy bill specifically, but it can't be separated from that wider discussion. So I'm also proud of the work that's been undertaken by a UK Labour government to support that vision. Increases to the national living wage, meaning a pay rise for 200,000 of the lowest Scots, the Employment Rights Bill, which will ensure rights for workers in well-paid, secure work, ensuring the state pension rises by £470, ensuring that the debt repayment rate for Scottish families in receipt of universal credit will increase by £450 a year on average. And many of these issues we rehearsed in economy debates last week. So, in order to bring my remarks to a conclusion, Deputy Presiding Officer, I do think it is clear that this is a very serious issue, it's a very serious matter. It calls for two governments who are willing to work together to ensure energy security and to ensure that we bring down bills for people in the long term. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Kane. I would remind members that we do at this point have a fair bit of time in hand, and with that I call on Patrick Harvie to open, on behalf of the Scottish Greens, a generous 6 minutes.
Thanks very much, Presiding Officer. And like Paul O'Kane, can I just begin by acknowledging Liz Smith's announcement recently about her own future. Liz Smith has, I think, the distinction on the Conservative bench is that even when she says things that I find objectionable, she always says them in a constructive tone of voice. And that at least is something. Something that not all of our colleagues are able to manage. So wish her well at a personal level, as well as other members making similar announcements. I'm grateful for the chance to debate the wide range of issues that are raised in this motion, the wider cost of living agenda, as well as some of the specific issues on energy, which connect to last week's debate on energy policy. But I think this debate would have benefited from a slightly more open and reflective approach from both Labour and the SNP. Both Labour and the SNP seem to be using their motions and amendments in the debate today principally to lay out their own stall about what their government is doing. And I can acknowledge the reason why they might want to do that. But the truth is that there are positives and shortcomings on both sides from both governments. The importance of this issue, though, does cut across party political differences in many areas. Not just the inflation of recent years, but the many years of austerity and rising inequality in our society and around the world. And improving people's living standards is going to be urgent for the Scottish Government, for the UK Government, and frankly for any part of the political spectrum that believes in democracy and in basic values of equality and human rights, because the far right are now a sufficient existential threat to those assumptions about our society. And they are very successfully, frighteningly successful, at tapping into people's genuine anxieties about standards of living. So raising people's standard of living is urgent as a political inoculation for our society against those toxic values. And that's where I think Liz Smith, in talking about far-right politicians like Trump, I think unsafely makes the assumption of good faith on the part of people like Trump and indeed Liz Truss. That assumption should not be held. In looking at the record of the two governments, from the Scottish Government side, of course, there are positives to talk about. Recently, the rent freeze, sadly now being taken off a cliff edge instead of a continued taper to allow a soft landing from that temporary policy. The under-22s bus travel, action that's been taken over a number of years on the cost of the school day, continued commitment to free prescriptions, not saddling students with tens of thousands of pounds in debt before they've even started their careers, and commitment to action on the two-child limit and the winter fuel payment, and uprating benefits, including unique ones like the Scottish Child Payment. There are many positive steps that have been taken by the Scottish Government. There are positive steps that I want to acknowledge from the current UK Government as well. I give way, yeah.
Liz Smith.
Thank you to Patrick Harvie for giving way. If we were to undertake all these universal benefits, anybody could make a case for virtually all of them. Does Mr Harvie agree that we have to have a really serious debate about the level of funding and to make some very difficult choices, but nonetheless ones that are essential to cutting back on some of the public expenditure that we simply cannot afford?
Patrick Harvey.
I do think that we need a serious conversation about cutting back on the level of chronic inequality in the distribution of wealth in our society, because that's the fundamental problem. If we want Scandinavian levels of public services, which I do, we need Scandinavian levels of taxation. You can't have high levels of public services and US levels of taxation, and the lack of a wealth tax is critical to that. I wanted to come on to the UK Government. They have taken really positive steps on raising the minimum wage, for example, as well as bus fare caps. The Warm Home Discount, I think, is mentioned in their motion. And at the moment, although there's still some ambiguity, they are open to some element of public role for public ownership in energy through GB Energy. And I still want to know more about the detail about how it's going to work, because I think there's still some lack of clarity. But there are also major shortcomings on the part of both governments. The UK Government has no willingness to use rent controls, for example. It still permits precarious working conditions. It refuses to use progressive income tax that's already shown itself to be effective in Scotland, or indeed a wealth tax, one of the things that's so lacking in the structure of inequality in our society. And even if GB Energy is successful in seeing more public ownership of the energy system, Labour are still willing to do the bidding of the nuclear industry lobbyists, despite the eye-wateringly high price of both new and old nuclear. And incoming are those benefit cuts. Paul O'Kane quite honestly says he doesn't know the detail of that. I don't know the detail of it either. None of us know for 100% certainty what the detail is going to be. What we know with certainty is that it's coming, and that it's not going to cause pain for the likes of us. Those of us in this chamber on generous salaries. It is going to be targeted on those who are much more vulnerable. On energy, the single biggest step I would like to see from the UK Government is to decouple energy bills, because the artificial link between gas and electricity prices means that the cheap, abundant, clean, green, renewable electricity we're generating is not benefiting people on their bills. As for the Scottish Government, they are watering down the proposals on rent controls. They have reintroduced peak time rail fares. We could have moved straight away to a £2 bus fare cap right away. We managed to persuade him to go to a pilot, but we could have skipped that stage. The most glaring area of absence, however, of action is the Cabinet Secretary mentioned energy efficiency in her speech and in her motion. But we know that the Heat in Buildings Bill is the critical policy tool to drive an investment in the clean heat sector, to give regulatory clarity and to give financial support to those who need it. Even now, running a heat pump can be just as cost-effective as running a gas boiler, and with a modern, much more efficient heat pump and a flexible tariff can be as little as half the cost of running a gas boiler. But people need the financial support, either through loans, through green mortgages or other schemes, including grants, to make that shift, to be able to make the investment in order to get those financial savings from their energy bills. Last week, the First Minister told the Chamber the Government is considering all the issues that were raised in the consultation in Heat and Buildings. We will respond as soon as we can. The trouble is that's precisely where things stood a year ago. A year ago. That bill was on track to introduce in November. Now it's missing without explanation, and I hope the Cabinet Secretary will explain that delay in the closing speech. Further delay on that bill is unacceptable. It would risk seeing the legislation fail to pass during the current session of Parliament, and that leaves the entire industry at a complete loss to know whether it's worth investing in the skills, the capacity, the supply chain that we need to bring down those costs for the future. So that bill must be introduced now, and I hope the Cabinet Secretary in closing will explain where it is and what's happened to it.
Thank you, Mr Harvey. And I now call on Willie Rennie to open on behalf of the Scottish Liberal Democrats. A generous 6 minutes.
I think Liz Smith was right to open her contribution with putting this in context, because all of what we've discussed this afternoon in the main dwarfs into insignificance compared with what could be coming. And Mr Trump is trying to change the way that the US economy works. He is trying to bring jobs back to the United States of America, and he is determined to do almost anything in order to achieve that. And as his comments within recent days have acknowledged, it might be turbulent, as he puts it, in the short term, but his long-term goal is quite clear, and he is very transactional in that process, and he is prepared to run over almost anybody to achieve that. And we need to be wise to that, and we need to recognise the enormous challenges that that poses to us. And I think we've therefore got to recognise that the Prime Minister has, I think, played a pretty significant role so far. I think he has, by getting alongside Mr Trump, tried to persuade and influence and change. Now, I don't know how successful he's going to be. I'm sure he doesn't know how successful he is going to be. But he is right to try and do so. I think the way he has tried to create that bridge between Europe, Ukraine and the United States is exactly the right thing to do. And we need to listen, and mostly listen, incredibly carefully, because we will need long-term solutions that will be in our own benefit. Yes, we'll take an intervention from Fergus.
Fergus, you?
I'm grateful to Mr Rennie, and I do find myself agreeing with the sentiments and the generous manner in which he's making these reflections. Could I put it to him, though, that equally a profound risk for Britain is that the high energy costs here, 4 times greater than the US, and an average 48% higher than the average in Europe, mean that industrial activity is really under threat for commodity products which can be manufactured just about in any modern country. And we stand really on the precipice of losing not just Grangemouth, but many, many more such industries over the next decade.
Willie Rennie?
Yes, he and I have been working very closely with a lot of those very industries, and I do worry deeply about the long-term consequences, also in terms of the dumping of cheap steel from China into other markets across the world and the consequences that will have for our domestic production, but also our internal security too. I think one of the most significant parts of the Cabinet Secretary's contribution this afternoon was a long-term solution, and that was the support that she's providing to the WISE Group and relational mentoring, which I've been very impressed with, because it looks to try and calm the household, to bring them out of poverty, to give them the tools to be able to sustain themselves and their household and lift the child and the children out of poverty within that house. It's a sustainable future within their own hands, which is surely what we've got to try and get to. Because although I am a strong supporter of the child payment, it simply, as I've said this before, it simply covers up the fact that there are so many children in Scotland who are in that precarious position and that their families are unable to support themselves. So that's what we should be trying to tackle for the long-term solutions to make sure that they are able to sustain themselves. Because if you look at the economic inactivity levels in Scotland, they're shocking. I mean, it's 24%. Now, England is not much better at about 21, 22%. But the economic inactivity levels is something that should deeply concern us. Not just because it means our economy is weaker and we don't have the fiscal returns from those individuals in paying their taxes, but it's not good for them either. It's not, I mean, if they've got deep-rooted health problems already that makes them incapable of working, this is going to compound those particular problems by not giving them the goodness of work. And I think work is good. I think we should be encouraging people into work and giving them the means for doing so. Now, a big part of that is the way that our NHS isn't actually supporting people to get back into work, because the waits are just so long, particularly for the new forms of economic inactivity around about mental health, autism, ADHD, where the waits are just enormous. So we should be looking at some of those deep-rooted issues within the way that our public services support people to get back into work. But as I've said, I do support the payments, and we will support the government's motion today. But another area I hope the Cabinet Secretary will look at very closely is the operation of the insulation programmes and the home energy system support. Because in terms of installation of heat pumps and other home energy systems, The application process is too complex, it takes too long, and as a result, the implementation, the installation of these new technologies is far too slow. It's a fraction of what we need to be getting to if we're hoping to try and tackle the problems. Equally so with insulation. They've stopped publishing the figures on a constituency basis anymore when I started publishing my press releases in response to it. But there's only, in North East Fife, 40,000 homes. The Home Energy Scotland boasted that they had insulated a few hundred homes in the last 8 years. Now, it's a fraction of what we should be doing. I know, recognise we do have area-based schemes, but it's still a fraction of what we should be getting. Why is it so slow to get the retrofitting done in these homes? We surely should be speeding this process up. That, again, will help people with their bills at home. And the final point is my colleague Angus MacDonald, the MP in the Highlands, has been running a campaign about decoupling the gas and electricity prices, which I know others in the chamber have done so too. The cost, the lifetime cost in 2021 of average lifetime cost of producing onshore wind was 39% lower than gas generation. And solar, it was 11% lower than gas generation. But when it comes to the price that people pay in their homes, why is it that electricity is so much higher? And that particularly disadvantaged people who are off-grid in the Highlands and places that Fergus Ewing and others represent. So we need to try and resolve this problem. And we know that the UK level and Ofgem are looking at the decoupling, but this needs to be accelerated, not just in terms of bringing down the cost of people's energy bills, but also incentivising renewable technologies. These are the kind of steps, the long-term solutions that we should be looking at. Economic inactivity, the support that's available through home energy, the decoupling of energy bills, and also, first and foremost, helping individual families to help themselves out of poverty.
Thank you, Mr Rennie. We now move to the open debate. I call Willie Coffey to be followed by Graeme Simpson. Mr Coffey.
Thanks very much, Presiding Officer. I just think at the outset it's a wee bit disappointing that we've only got 4 Labour members and 4 Conservative members in the Chamber on such an important debate that members have already said initially. Presiding Officer, people in my constituency don't need me to tell them that their energy bills are rocketing and that Labour's cost of living crisis is getting worse. They know that. They know who's to blame for this. They want to hear what we can do about it here in Scotland, in this Parliament, how we are helping, despite the madness of Trump in the USA, who, by the looks of it, Presiding Officer, he's ramping up tariffs in Canada now and stealing aluminium to 50%. I mean, it's just gone mad, as we all know, with Mr Trump. Our powers in this place are limited, Presiding Officer, and we've got a fixed budget to try and tackle many of the issues people are facing. But there are plenty of examples of how this SNP government is helping, and I'll cover some of it today. We can't, though, overlook the disastrous performance of Labour in government. In the door 5 minutes, and the pensioners have been robbed and abandoned. Energy bills have gone up, not down, as they promised. And now the poor, the disabled and the most vulnerable are in for it, if the rumours are accurate that another £6 billion of cuts are heading our way. The easiest targets of all, pensioners and the disabled, will be made to pay for Labour's tenure in office so far. A cost of living crisis is certainly here, and they are making it worse. With some justification, though, they can point backwards to the appalling legacy left by Liz Truss, mentioned in the Chamber a few times already. In fact, that the UK's biscuit tin in the Treasury was empty when the Tories left. But they must have known this in advance of the election last summer. The civil service always briefs a potential incoming government about the state of the public finances. So either they didn't understand the message, or they chose to ignore it and carry on with the false promises that they made to the electorate just to get their foot in the door. Read my lips, no austerity under Labour, and we will save jobs at Grangemouth. I think will forever... Just hold on a minute. Read my lips, no austerity under Labour, and we will save the jobs at Grangemouth will forever be millstones around Labour colleagues' necks, and I'll give way to
Sarah Boyack.
Thank you very much. Would you like to comment about the £5.2 billion extra the Scottish Government got this year in its budget, and the £200 million that we got for Grangemouth, which will help in terms of keeping jobs, but also creating new jobs as part of Project Willow?
Yeah, I'd certainly like to comment that the member describes it as though it's some kind of handout, some kind of gift. This is Scottish taxpayers' money. Remember, coming back to where it belongs. This money doesn't belong to the UK Government, it's Scottish taxpayers' money. So, in all of this, though, what has the SNP done to try and help? Well, the Scottish budget, for a start, will help millions of households across Scotland. And one of the things that will make a big difference is the new Scottish winter fuel payment, where every pensioner household will receive £100 next winter, with others receiving £200 or £300. It might not be a huge amount of money when you think of the energy bills that people are facing, but at least it's cash going to pensioners and not being taken from them by Labour's soaring energy bills. The Scottish budget will also provide £3 billion to directly support vulnerable and low-income households to help them deal with Labour's cost of living crisis. We already provide over £200 million each year, reversing Labour's austerity measures that they decided to keep in place when the Tories left office. We've got a council tax reduction scheme in place that helps nearly 500,000 households, that we provide free school meals to all P1 to P5s and soon to expand to P6 and P7s who receive the Scottish Child Payment. And talking of the Scottish Child Payment, Presiding Officer, it supports every eligible child in Scotland to the tune of £26.70 a week and has been described as a game changer in the fight to tackle child poverty in Scotland. We're helping to make our homes warmer and will tackle fuel poverty with £300 million going towards clean heating measures that will help reduce bills. People in lower earnings can get help up to £10,000 to heat their homes, and homeowners can access grants of up to £15,000. They do need a bit more help, though, as Willie Rennie pointed out earlier, in making the correct choices, I think, that are appropriate for them. And trusted partners would be a great part of that, I think, Presiding Officer. All of this was in the SNP budget, making a difference to the lives of people in my constituency and right across the country. As usual, Presiding Officer, I'm indebted to my East Ayrshire SNP and some independent colleagues there for delivering the same kind of support directly to their communities in their recent budget. They've got £1 million going in to support their anti-poverty and inequality strategy, with emphasis on affordable and accessible food, free school meals for all of P1 to P7 children down there, plus half-price school meals for secondary pupils for the next 2 years. Clothing grants are also going up to £75, all opposed again down there by the rump of Labour councillors that are left, with their assortment of allies tagging on in desperation. They could have done much more had it not been for Labour's national insurance tax hike, which cost East Ayrshire £2.75 million. That's effectively added 4 percentage points onto the council tax bill down there. It's little wonder that the SNP won the recent Kilmarnock North by-election, where Mr Sarwar came down to make a cameo appearance during the campaign. Presiding Officer, with a fixed budget each year, you have to do the best you can with what you have. To offer hope to our people that their SNP government will help when the Unionist, Labour and Tory parties contrive to attack our most vulnerable citizens instead. We've done this. I'm proud of what the SNP has achieved in office, and I look forward to the day when we no longer need to mitigate the worst excesses of a failed, money-grabbing, broken union. I'm delighted to support the SNP government motion today. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Coffey. I now call Graham Simpson to be followed by Fergus Ewing. Mr Simpson.
Thank you very much indeed. Presiding Officer, the government's got a bit of a nerve today to present itself as squeaky clean in this debate, because actually no party is, not mine, certainly not the SNP, and definitely not Labour. Last week, my constituents in Falkirk learned they would be subject to the highest percentage rise in council tax bills in Scotland at 15.6%, because Labour rejected the already high increase suggested by the minority SNP administration and suggested an even higher amount. You really couldn't make it up. Now, contrast that with Labour in South Lanarkshire, Certainly.
Stephen Kerr.
I'm grateful that my colleague Graham Simpson raises the issue of the Falkirk Council tax increase because it was a Labour motion, but does he also note it was supported by the only Reform councillor in the council?
Graham Simpson.
Well, I wasn't aware of that, but it was still a daft idea. If you contrast that with Labour in South Lanarkshire, where the council leader is seeking election to this place, and we have the lowest rise in Scotland, but it's still inflation busting. Wherever you are, you'll be paying significantly more in council tax and way above inflation because of the way this government has hollowed out local government finances. Now, you can't blame councils for doing what they're doing, apart from Falkirk, because goodness knows what they were thinking of there. On top of council tax, there are other fiendish ways of raising money through parking charges. Glasgow's particularly bad for that. To, in the case of prudent South Lanarkshire, introducing a new fee for collecting garden waste. Council tax is a big and growing part of people's cost of living, but instead of forcing a freeze on councils, the SNP needs to properly fund them. Because part of the reason for this year's steep rises is that there is a fear of a pre-election freeze next year to buy off voters. So the gushing bit of the motion backing the recent budget is laughable. The budget has made things worse, not better. Now, energy bills, mentioned already, also form a big chunk of the household budget. Bills are far too high and are among the highest in Europe, and Fergus Ewing told us why that matters. Part of the reason for that is our reliance on gas, where the price is set in international markets. Willie Rennie spoke of the need to decouple markets. Somehow we do need to break that model and set our own prices. So I can agree with the government that we need to reform the energy market so long as the aim is to bring prices down. Now, we're not... Yes, I will.
Kevin Stewart.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I'm pleased to hear Mr Simpson saying that we need to reform energy markets. Can he maybe tell us why the Conservative government, who have not long left office, didn't attempt to do so?
Graham Simpson.
Well, I could say to Kevin Stewart that the previous government should have looked at this issue. You know, I think they should have looked at this issue because it's a serious issue that affects everyone, not just every individual, but businesses as well. But the UK we haven't got the highest bills in Europe. That accolade falls to Germany, which has the highest electricity prices, which, as I pointed out last week, is connected to it getting rid of nuclear power. But we should not worry, of course, because Labour promised to cut energy bills by £300 a year. What's happened? They've gone up. The annual energy bill for a household using a typical amount of gas and electricity will go up by £111 a year to £1,849 from April, as Liz Smith has already pointed out. Now, Ofgem Chief Executive Jonathan Brearley said, "We know that no price rise is ever welcome." He's right about that, and that the cost of energy remains a huge challenge for many households, most households, but our reliance on international gas markets leads to volatile wholesale prices and continues to drive up bills, which is why it's more important than ever that we're driving forward investment in a cleaner, homegrown system. Presiding Officer, GB Energy, that's been mentioned already. That's that ill-defined vehicle to deliver goodness knows what, may even be getting its budget cut before it's even started. 88% of Scottish businesses have said that high energy costs are impacting investment decisions. That goes back to what Fergus Ewing was saying. 77% say it's forced them to put prices up for customers, according to a survey of 234 businesses conducted last month. And let's not forget the disgraceful scrapping of the winter fuel allowance by Labour. And speaking of benefits, if a Conservative government said it was going to cut the welfare bill by £6 billion, the members opposite would be apoplectic. But we now have the bizarre situation of a number of Labour MPs backing such a move, including my own, East Kilbride's Joni Reid. If Mr O'Kane wants to intervene, he's very welcome to, but I notice he doesn't want to. Now, cost of living affects us all, but for too many, it's gone beyond acceptable. Transport is the engine of the economy. People and goods need to get about. Now, you can sit and shiver at home and try to cobble together enough money to pay the council tax, but at some point you will have to go out. And even though the government has abandoned its daft 20% car miles reduction target, that should not stop it trying to encourage more people onto public transport by making it more affordable. We've debated this before, but reintroducing peak fares on trains, a move which this Parliament rejected but was ignored, not only makes things more expensive, but is likely to lead to fewer people using trains. Cheaper, simpler fares led to 10 million more journeys, according to The Times this week. Labour's national insurance hikes will cost businesses £25 billion and lead to fewer jobs and higher costs for people. I'm afraid Paul O'Kane is in total denial on this. And speaking of costs to businesses, we can look at business rates relief applied at 40% in 25-26
The member's
England.
bringing his remarks to close.
Well, I would be very happy to take the intervention.
The member is already at 7 minutes 40, and I think it's probably time to bring his remarks to close.
Okay. So on business rates here in Scotland, it will only apply to hospitality and music venues, so retail loses out. That will have a major impact on our struggling high streets. Liz Smith's amendment mentions growth, a dirty word to some in this chamber, but she's right that it's vital, and to that end, investment in infrastructure such as the A9 is essential. We need to get Scotland moving to foster renewal and cut bills.
Thank you, Mr Simpson. I now call Fergus Ewing to be followed by Faisal Chowdhury. Mr Ewing.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The debate started when Liz Smith spoke in a characteristically thoughtful way of raising our attention to the most serious situation facing the world in my lifetime, and rightly so. And could I say, Presiding Officer, that the common sense always expressed with grace, as expounded by Liz Smith over her long period in Parliament, will be missed by a great many. I do hope that her outdoor education bill will be passed by this Parliament. I'm not quite sure what the whips have in mind for me there, but I plan to vote for it anyway, so that's it. And if I may break another rule gently, Presiding Officer, could I just say, Liz, we will miss you. So could I, in this debate, address a somewhat different perspective to that which has been offered? I think the gravity of the issues really require us to consider the wider, bigger picture. And I'm afraid there really is a foreseeable danger, a likelihood, I believe, sadly, that energy costs for people throughout the UK will rise further over most years for the next decade. And a substantial reason for that is the factor that I've mentioned, that much of the bill paid for running the grid at the moment is paid for by heavy industry. But the inevitable result of the high energy costs in the UK, according to the Institute of Economic Affairs, 4 times that of the USA, 48% higher than the average European industry costs. And the Internet tells me, if it's correct, that steel costs for manufacturers in the UK are £113 per megawatt hour as opposed to 61 in Germany and France. Now, in modern countries, we can produce steel, we can produce fertiliser, we can produce chemicals, we can produce concrete, we can produce all sorts of things. But if our energy costs are of such a magnitude in excess of that of our competitors, then I'm afraid you don't really have to be Adam Smith or Warren Buffett to realise that something must give. And we have noticed that Grangemouth is closing. And high energy costs do seem to me to be the, as the lawyers would say, the causa causans of that decision. Britain has the highest industry energy costs in the world. We are likely to see the possible extinction of chemical manufacturing in the UK alongside many other sectors. Now, why will this impact on consumers? Because the enormous financial contributions that they make towards maintaining the transmission and distribution system, but also in the planned upgrade of the grid. And I think we're talking over £1 trillion here in total, according to some estimates. An enormous cost. If we eliminate a huge chunk of the revenue, who's going to pay? Well, the bills will go up, unless a presiding officer, in my view at least, we change things, and we change things radically, and we're willing to open our eyes to these things. Moreover, people currently working in these industries, many of them will simply retire. They will not seek other employment if they're of a certain age. Others who are younger may well decide to do the same work in other countries, and we lose all their income. And others may end up, sadly, in fuel poverty for one reason or another. So that will further exacerbate the problems that we are facing today. In other words, we cannot isolate the issues of consumer costs from the wider economic picture. They are umbilically connected. If we ignore these factors, we're ignoring reality, and we may as well be reenacting a kind of grisly version of the Emperor's New Clothes. So on energy prices for the UK, to paraphrase the great singer Al Jolson, if you think it's bad now, you ain't seen nothing yet. And I regret saying that, but what are the solutions? Well, decoupling the electricity market price from gas is something that should certainly be considered. I think it was rejected on 7th of March last year in the review of the electricity market, the REMA process. I'm not quite sure that that in itself would really do anything other than change the way the deck chairs are arrayed. It does seem to me that we do need to look more widely. I think we must maximise gas production in the UK from the North Sea fields, for example, Jackdaw. And in doing so, we would be supporting fields which produce oil and gas at much lower emissions. I mean, Rosebank, if you look at the internet, and I checked this recently with Equinor, will produce at carbon emissions of 12 kilograms of CO2 per barrel. Fracked gas is produced in Qatar and the USA at nearly 80 kilograms. It certainly will.
Cabinet Secretary Julian Martin.
Cabinet Secretary.
I'm always interested to hear Fergus Ewing's thoughts on these issues. One of the problems I've had is that some of the fields that he's talking about, which I won't go into detail in, we have been long warning that it should have been more stricter climate compatibility checkpoints, which should take the sort of things that he's just mentioned into consideration. Does he think that that's been a misstep by previous UK governments not to have actually foreseen the issues that would have been there and to do that critical work?
Fergus Ewing.
Well, I don't want to be political, but I mean, whoever did it was certainly stepping off a cliff. And I'm afraid, I think we were toying with that injudicious step forward at one point as well. There's no point denying it. But listen, if we got it wrong in the past, that doesn't mean we can't get it right in the future. We just need the guts to admit that we have to do it. And more people are coming to this view in every single opinion poll that's taken in Scotland. Moreover, I understand that when you look at new gas-fired power stations, the technology is such that they're far more efficient and less emitting than either coal or nuclear, especially the modern combined cycle, which can reach 60% efficiency because they capture and use the plant's hot exhaust gases to spin a secondary turbine which generates more electricity. Thus, less energy is lost in the conversion process of gas to electricity. The new gas plant efficiency is 60% compared with nuclear or coal at 33%. And yes, renewable is cheap. Well, not. I think I might get much time left.
I think the member is bringing his remarks to a close.
renewables are cheap when they operate, but it's the fact that they don't operate all the time that adds to the constraint costs, although constraint costs are greater for gas. In conclusion, Presiding Officer, I was going to make a remark about the Greens, but I don't think I'll spoil my peroration. So I'll just say I do hope we can, across the parties, face reality, come to our senses, recognise we need a proper mix, take the emotion out of the debate, and get back to common sense to make sure that our electricity system does not cost massively more for the people who sent us here.
Thank you, Mr Ewing. I now call Faisal Chowdhury to be followed by Marie McNair. Mr Chowdhury.
Thank you. My apologies to you and members for being late. Deputy Presiding Officer, despite wholesale gas and electricity price falling in the last 2 years, the public are still paying 43% more than they were being before Putin's invasion to Ukraine. All members will have been contacted by constituents facing trouble with the cost of energy or inaccurate bills. No person should be faced with the choice of heating their home or feeding their family. Communities have come together to support those most at risk. Members will have received the briefing from the Warm Welcome campaign, showing the 209 warm spaces which have been opened across Scotland, including Granton Parish Church and the Heart of New Haven in Edinburgh. But governments must take the lead in protecting the most vulnerable, and I welcome the recently announced action by the Labour UK government in that regard, expanding the Warm Homes discount to an extra 3 million families. Let me progress then, meaning 1 in 5 Scottish households will be supported with their bills next winter, taking action on energy debt, which increased by 20% in 2023 alone, by working with Ofgem on a debt reset to give customers a clean slate after years of financial stress, and stopping inaccurate bills and unlawful back billing. These changes are common sense and will support households during rising costs. And I support the overall review of FGEM. So it meets the needs of consumers and is able to hold energy companies to account. But here in Scotland, we should be going further in supporting the most vulnerable. I was contacted by constituents who is chronically ill and must spend £143 a month to heat a single room, or she will, let me progress a bit, or she will fall seriously ill. Her situation is not unique, with carer, older people and disabled people all facing similar struggles. The Scottish Government should use their record budget settlements from the Labour government to ensure no one left behind. But we should be clear that this solution, while welcome, don't deal with the root causes, which is the cost of energy in Scotland and the UK is the highest in Europe. In the long term, that is not sustainable for families, and it is not sustainable for businesses. At this point, I would like to draw attention to members that I was involved in catering in the industry. I frequently speak with those in the restaurant industry who have had to close or downsize due to rising bills, costing jobs and money to our economy. We need to decouple ourselves from an unstable international energy market, which leaves the welfare of Scots at the whim of Putin. This establishment and operation of GB Energy cannot come soon enough in that regard. GB Energy will deliver the energy independence we need by investing in clean energy that we know lower emission creates jobs and tackle the climate crisis. It will also invest in new and emerging technologies like tidal energy and floating offshore, and cementing Scotland as a global leader in the sector. We need to see the retrofitting and upgrading of homes accelerated. 44% of the Scottish homes have an EPC rating of less than C. Increasing from D to C saves households up to 15% on their bills, according to the Energy Saving Trust. But the Scottish Government has cut the energy efficiency by decarbonising budget in real terms. And the heat and building bills is stuck in limbo 1 year after the consultation closed. If we do not lower energy costs and make buildings more energy efficient in the long term, government will be forced to continue firefighting with support from consumers when energy bills rise. Lastly, this area sees considerable overlap between developed and reserved responsibility. So if we are to upgrade our energy grid and deliver our families in the long term, we need to see positive collaboration between the UK and Scottish Government. I welcome the action announced by the Labour Government, including warm homes discount and tackling energy debt. But if we are to beat this problem permanently, we have to move to clean energy and bring down prices. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Chowdhury. I now call Marie McNair to be followed by Stephen Kerr. Mr McNair.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I welcome the chance to speak today to contribute to assert what is necessary to support households with cost of living pressures and rising energy bills. I also thank children's hospices across Scotland and other organisations for their informative briefings. Presiding Officer, the Scottish Government is taking clear and substantial action to support households by investing £6.9 billion in social security. The Scottish Government will support around 2 million people in 2025-26 with the cost of living crisis. And by providing over £300 million in heat and building programmes, they will support over 200 households to save up to £500 a year on their energy bills. This debate today also gives me a chance to highlight how local individuals and groups in my constituency have been working tirelessly to support those in need. These groups offer targeted local support which works in tandem with the Scottish Government's financial support. And there are so many, so I'll only name a few. Centre 81, Cowie St Andrew's Church, Improving Lives, Oaklepatrick Food Parcels and Damure Barclay Church all provide warm hubs with food, drinks and a safe space to have a chat and socialise. Many of these groups and others, such as the Western Bartonshire Community Food Share, Eastern Bartonshire Food Bank based in Mulgai and Faithfully Food Share, also provide food pantries, providing thousands of food parcels for those in need. And going even further, the likes of the Recycle Room and the Zarrow Community Initiative, among many others, recycle clothes, household items and offer energy-saving advice to those that need it. Having held annual cost of living events in Clydebank, which continue to be well attended, I know how valuable these local groups are to my constituents, and I am so grateful to all of them. And I welcome today's announcement by the Cabinet Secretary in the investment of £2 million that will fund wraparound support to households. Presiding Officer, prior to the general election in July last year, Labour said they would lower energy bills by £300, yet only months later, Ofgem announced that the price gap would rise to £1,849 this year. And this is a third increase in a row and 9.4% higher than this time last year. Have Keir Starmer and the Labour Party been uneconomical with the truth? It seems so. A recent opinion poll found that just 12% of Scots think Labour will cut energy bills, and this is appalling, especially when Scotland is such an energy source. Sir Keir Starmer must apologise for breaking his promises and urgently outline what emergency steps he will take to reverse these huge increases to household bills. Scotland is an energy-rich country, Yet under Labour, families are being forced to pay amongst the highest electricity prices in Europe. Presiding Officer, high energy bills will impact many people, but it will be particularly challenging for families who have a child with a life-limiting condition. Alongside specialist equipment and adaptations, these families will often face higher energy bills, with family members often less able to work due to caring responsibilities. And according to Chas, they are often paying double that of the average household to keep their child safe and comfortable. It's a heartbreaking situation, causing significant stress for families at a time when they should be able to just focus on their child. Lack of action from the UK Government on energy bills has real and devastating consequences, and I would urge my Labour colleagues here today to listen to Chas and other charities in their calls for the UK Government to take forward a social energy tariff to ease financial pressures on vulnerable households who face high energy costs. And it's also welcome that the Scottish Government's Social Tariff Working Group aims to make recommendations to the UK Government on the design of a social tariff mechanism. To make matters worse, at the end of last year, the Labour Government made an appalling decision to cut the winter fuel allowance. In trying to make savings, Labour decided to pick the pockets of pensioners. And despite uproar from the public, they have refused to U-turn. Even their own Labour members voted at their party conference to reverse their cut. And now dreadful briefings that they are targeting those on disability benefits. Whereas Paul O'Kane and his predecessor Pam Duncan-Glancy now as a so-called voice for those who are disabled. It's absolutely betrayal personified. Instead, the Scottish Government will mitigate the Labour UK Government's cruel cuts and reinstate, for example, a universal winter fuel payment, ensuring every pensioner gets a payment next year. And this will come as a great relief to my constituents and pensioners across Scotland. It is further proof that the SNP will prioritise and protect those in need. While the Labour Party push families into poverty, the SNP will protect them. So I will call again on the Labour MSPs in the Chamber today, call on your UK Government to make urgent progress to reduce energy bills for your constituents. We need action from your Government now, not later.
Thank you. I now call Stephen Kerr to be followed by Bob Doris. Around 6 minutes. Mr Kerr.
Presiding Officer, let me take a different tact, because I believe that for far too long the people of Scotland have been sold the lie that more government and higher taxes are the answer to every problem. And yet, after years of expanding government, taxes and bureaucracy, we have a country where people work harder but take home less, where pensioners can't afford to heat their homes. I thought it was very brave of Faisal Chowdhury to talk about families suffering a form of fuel poverty, when his Labour government has forced pensioners, many of them, into that situation. But we live in a situation where businesses are labouring under the crushing weight of regulation and taxation, where the SNP and Labour cling to their leftist fantasy that government is the solution, when in reality, government is a big part of the problem. The SNP here and Labour in Westminster have raised income tax, frozen thresholds and imposed punishing council tax hikes while failing to provide basic services. They've made life more expensive and difficult. This is not government standing up for working people. This is government bleeding them dry. The average Scot now hands over nearly half of what they earn to the government in some form of taxation, between income tax, national insurance, VAT, fuel duties, council tax and endless stealth taxes. And it's no wonder that working people are finding it harder just to stand still. The government takes, and what do Scots get in return? Crumbling roads, longer NHS waiting times, overstretched schools and local councils that can't even keep all the streetlights on. Where is all the money going? Public sector employment has grown far beyond that which is sustainable. Not because we're getting better services, but because the SNP has spent taxpayer money on bloated bureaucracy. Scotland now spends more on government administration per head than almost anywhere else in Europe. Labour campaigned on the promise not to raise taxes, yet in October's budget they increased taxation by £40 billion, and they announced plans to borrow a further £142 billion. The SNP incoherently bemoans the cost of living while burdening people with the highest taxes of any part of the United Kingdom. When it comes to Labour and the SNP, it turns out that Rishi Sunak was right, especially about Labour's tax plans, though it turns out that even he underestimated the scale of their tax rises. Labour, I will give way.
Paul O'Kane.
He mentions Rishi Sunak, and I made this point to him earlier. The man who gave working people the highest tax burden in a generation would be the first point to put on record. And secondly, is he going to take any cognizance of 14 years of a Conservative government, as Liz Smith rightly did, that Liz Truss and the decisions she made in her catastrophic mini-budget is what we're living with the reality of now?
Stephen Kerr, I'll give you the time back.
I think Paul O'Kane needs to think carefully about blaming the Conservatives for the highest tax burden in 80 years, which I acknowledge was true at the time. But the Labour government, of which he is so proud, have increased them even further. So I think he has to be proportionate in this. And I acknowledge that Labour, and I think he should too, because I know that Paul O'Kane is a man of integrity. They have broken the promises they made on taxes, and especially when it comes to the decision to remove the winter fuel allowance, one of the most disgraceful decisions by a UK government post an election when they promised to do the opposite that I think any of us can ever remember. Meanwhile, as Graham Simpson mentioned, Labour's GB Energy has been exposed, frankly, as a sham. Chief Executive admitted, again, very honestly, it's going to take 20 years just to create 1,000 jobs. I mean, the SNP and Labour are blindly pushing net zero policies that burden households with costs while offering no realistic alternatives. Compliance costs with green regulations are atmospherically high. And I'm grateful to Fergus Ewing for drawing attention to this Parliament on previous occasions, the case of the Elgin Procurator Fiscal's Office, which is valued at £275,000 as a property and yet is set to have £3.5 million spent on it in a refurbishment. This is just another expression of the kind of reckless spending of chasing net zero by 2045 that ignores financial reality. And I echo all the calls that have been made by speakers for reality. So let's talk about the reality of the North Sea oil and gas industry, which supports over 100,000 jobs and plays a significant role, a critical role, in our energy security. And by the way, it's jobs that we should be really focusing on in this Parliament. The creation of jobs, the protection of jobs, the idea that it's good to work. I think Willie Rennie covered that really well in his speech. And yet the SNP and Labour, I will give way to the Minister.
Very briefly, Cabinet Secretary.
Would Stephen Kerr recognise that the potential for creation of jobs in Scotland when the oil and gas basin declines as it is doing is with renewable energy, which will also take us to net zero?
Stephen Kerr, if you could begin winding up, please.
But this is the Energy Minister that just received a letter from the Just Transition Commission warning the Minister that there will be no jobs for the 400 workers at the Grangemouth refinery in foreseeable years to come. That's the nature of the transition. And if it's going to be just, then these issues need to be addressed. And it's not helped when Labour burden the oil and gas sector with further increases to the already high energy oil and gas profits levy, killing investment stone dead and risking thousands of jobs. I understand that I must now wind up, and so let me just simply say this, Presiding Officer. There are many issues which we have covered in this debate, but we have to get to the root causes of why our country is where it's at. And it is time for leadership. And the Scottish Conservatives will not apologise for advancing the argument for lower taxes and cheaper energy, because I didn't get to talk about nuclear, and I wish I had, and a government that treats working people as more than easy targets for tax. Scotland can't afford more of this socialist same. It is time to stand up for the people of Scotland. Our party will do so and will end this relentless attack on the finances of households and businesses.
Thank you, Mr Kerr. I now call Bob Doris to be followed by Mark Griffin. Around 6 minutes. Mr Doris.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. The UK's cost of living crisis has become a well-coined phrase in recent years. The danger is we use the expression as a throwaway phrase. We normalise it and we accept the consequences which flow from that. Well, it's not a throwaway phrase. It shouldn't be. Our Scottish Government have no intention of normalising this UK cost of living crisis, and we'll do all we can to improve the lived experience of many families who are impacted by those cost of living pressures. So the Scottish Government is doing its bit, and let me put that on the record. We spend £1.3 billion more on social security protections than we receive from the UK Government. We spend £6.9 billion in total, with £644 million for entitlements not available anywhere else in the UK that struggling Scots can access. So when families in Scotland, many of them working households, and let me say that again, that's vitally important, many of them working households claim universal credit, they really struggle. It's not fit for purpose. That is why the Scottish Government has invested £470 million this year in the Scottish Child Payment, putting money into the pockets of families of 333,000 children and keeping 60,000 children out of poverty. And there are many other Scottish Government measures which often actually go completely overlooked indeed, due to the heft and the impact of its big brother, if you like, the Scottish Child Payment. Let me mention two in particular that make a real difference at the root of the problem, and that is Best Start Foods and the Best Start Grant. Key food and provisions at such a key time in the lives of young children and families. In the round, that's prevented 100,000 children falling into poverty. Real action on cost of living pressures. So how does this connect to cost of living pressures? Let's be frank. It means families can actually buy a bit more food when they go to the supermarket, despite soaring prices. It means they've got a better chance of being able to heat their homes, despite continued rising energy prices under the Labour Party. That's the impact our constituents want to see. And this is where the credibility of Labour is quickly shredded. As the Scottish Government is putting money into the pockets of Scottish families, the UK Labour Party are cutting holes in them said same pockets. Be that those who will lose their jobs due to the employer national insurance contributions, a jobs tax, who will see, due to Labour action, their income slashed and cost of living pressures like never before. Those jobs that are lost will see people enter the world of social security entitlements where they've not had to use them before. So I say to people that are questioning whether we should do all of this, these social protections will be there for those workers if or when they may unfortunately lose their jobs due to Labour's jobs tax. The Labour Party are also dipping the pockets of 900,000 Scottish pensioners. That won't help pensioners get their messages in or pay their fuel bills. That leaves the SNP to restore a universal winter fuel payment robbed from Scottish pensioners, which we will return here in Scotland in the next year. £100 guaranteed to everyone, that increasing to £200 or £300, depending on income levels. I think Labour are discovering, and I appreciate this actually, Labour are discovering being in government is challenging. They may find, however, that it's better to cope with those challenges by having underlying principles and sticking to them when in government. When you lose those underlying principles, you have nothing. Instead, Labour still insist they will lower energy bills by £300. Yet, since they came to power, there has been energy price rises of £149 in October last year, £21 just in January, and another £111 from April this year. So Labour appear in denial, still putting leaflets indeed claiming they're making pensioners £400 better off and lowering energy bills. Well, that's denial, of course, Presiding Officer, or potentially deliberately trying to hoodwink voters in forthcoming by-elections in Glasgow, where those leaflets still circulate today, I understand, and that is just shameless. Now, I want to say a little bit in the time I have left about getting people into work. I agree with contributions elsewhere within the chamber into full-time work, preferably, and work that pays. Now, we sometimes forget about the early groundwork this Scottish Government did. So, for example, the family nurse partnerships, working with young mums who have babies, putting real intensive support in so that they are economically active and contribute to society despite their challenges. That is good work ongoing that does make a difference. We are building on our childcare commitments in relation to breakfast clubs and after-school care. A huge call to be hugely flexible in relation to that, because sometimes the issue is not unemployment, it's underemployment, and flexibility in childcare is absolutely key. And also, just the time I have left, in relation to getting people who are on benefits and not actively seeking work due to their disabilities or their underlying health conditions. It used to be some time ago, I think it was actually in the 1980s, under a Conservative government, where if you felt that you might be able to enter into work despite all the challenges you had, and for whatever reason that work broke down, be you were made redundant, you lost your job, you just couldn't cope with the underlying health issues, then you were put back onto your underlying benefit, no questions asked. The problem with the Labour Party is this: they're not encouraging people with disabilities into work, they're forcing, compelling and sanctioning people into work, and that's not the way to do it. It's not the Scottish way, and I will have no part of it. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
Thank you, Mr Doris. I now call Mark Griffin to be followed by Ben McPherson. Around 6 minutes. Mr Griffin.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. It's stating the obvious to say that energy prices are high in the UK right now. This month's energy price cap rise will mean an increase of around £9 per month for a typical household over the next 3 months. But I think Liz Smith and a number of other speakers in the debate today have talked about the reasons for that being well beyond the control of either the Scottish or the UK Government. A perfect storm of factors has driven up the price of gas since the start of 2025, pushing British energy bills up with them. Because of the war in Ukraine, the pipeline delivering Russian gas to European countries through Ukraine was switched off at the start of the year. Wholesale gas prices are... Yeah, I will, yeah.
I thank Mr Griffin for giving way, and he says that these issues are beyond the realms of the Scottish Government, which I agree with. But in terms of prices, it is not beyond the realms of possibility for the Labour UK Government to change energy prices and to decouple energy prices from international gas prices. Why doesn't the Labour Government consider doing that?
Mark Griffin.
I'm not sure if Kevin Stewart was listening to the points that I made. I was talking about the reasons for the price rises being out with the control of the Scottish and UK governments, talking about the impact of the war in Ukraine, talking about the impact of the shutting down of that gas pipeline through Ukraine from Russia to Europe. That's the points I was making, that the factors that are affecting the price of gas and energy bills are out with the control of both governments, rather than... Sorry, I'll make some progress and I'll address the point that he's making. So, rather than the point that he's making, but I do agree with the point behind his intervention. If he wants to listen to me respond to it or carry on his conversation, Mr Stewart, that there is an issue clearly with the linking between gas and electricity. It's particularly harmful for our switch to gas heating to electricity heating, the impact that people are seeing when they do take the switch to heat pumps or solar-powered or other forms of heating. It is causing problems, and it is something that a government should look at and address. And I think that is clearly because wholesale gas prices are around 15% higher than they were in the period covered under the previous price cap. And I think that's made worse. It's made worse by the choices of the previous Conservative government, that now Britain is more reliant on gas than almost all of our European neighbours. And so that increase in wholesale gas price has a bigger impact on us as consumers and as businesses too. And as this motion says, this has helped to contribute to the cost of living crisis facing those who are most vulnerable. Following Liz Truss's disastrous mini-budget, the annual rate of inflation peaked at 11.1% in October 2022, a 41-year high. Over the 3 years between May 2021 and May 2024, food prices rose by 30.6%. It had previously taken over 13 years, from January 2008 to May 2021, for average food prices to rise by that same amount. And we know that it's low-income households across the UK who have been hit hardest by those rising prices. ONS data shows that households with the lowest income experienced a higher than average inflation rate. That disparity due to low-income households being more deeply affected by those rising costs. Yeah, I will.
Stephen Kerr.
Mark Griffin not at all concerned about the widespread views expressed by business groups and industry bodies that we're about to see massive increases in unemployment, especially among young people, because of the consequences of Labour's first budget last October, with the increase of taxes and costs on businesses, the national insurance increase. Is he not concerned at all about this? And does he not recognise that every Labour government does this, increases unemployment?
Mark Griffin, I'll give you time back for both interventions.
I mean, I think Mr Kerr might want to reflect on the record of previous Labour governments, particularly the incoming Labour government in 1997, who slashed unemployment, fixing the Conservative mess. And the reason that the UK Labour government has had to increase the burden on UK companies is, again, because of the mess we've found ourselves in, because of Liz Truss, because of the series of failures by a whole series of failed UK Conservative Prime Ministers. That's the mess that we've had to fix. That's the reason why the burden has been increased on UK companies. But it's still something that we're listening to very carefully, and we'll try and work with those businesses that have been affected. Now, the budget that this motion praises is only possible because of that UK Labour government delivering record investment for Scotland, the largest block grant in the history of devolution, resulting in an additional £5.2 billion for this Scottish Government. That has come about as a result of those tax decisions, and has meant that this Scottish Government has been able to invest that in ways to reduce people's the impact on families' bills on cost of living through some of the proposals on winter fuel allowance that we proposed long before the SNP decided to include that in their budget. But Labour's interventions in the energy market will mean that we will no longer be so vulnerable to international shocks, to energy prices, and as a country we will be able to bring down bills for households and businesses for good. Labour's work to deliver record budget settlements for the Scottish Government and help with fuel payments for 500,000 Scots all demonstrate the difference a Labour Government with a new direction in Scotland can make. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
Thank you, Mr Griffin. I now call Ben McPherson to be followed by Fulton McGregor. Around 6 minutes, Mr McPherson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And this debate is, of course, on the issues affecting our constituents the most, not just at this time, but over many decades past, because the scenarios that those we serve are faced with right now are not the consequence of just recent months and years. They're not the consequence of one party's time in government or another. They've been built up over decades. Yeah. For my lifetime, I've seen these root causes take shape. Over the last 40 years, the Conservative Party have been in power more at Westminster than anyone else. So when Conservative colleagues apportion blame elsewhere, they're not taking responsibility. The Labour Party have missed opportunities, done some things well, done some things that they should have done better, in my view. The Liberal Democrats have been in coalition at the turn of the crash, and we in the Scottish Government have used our powers to the best effect, whether it's the SNP and the Greens, Would we have done some things differently if we could reflect back? Would we have tried to do some things in a slightly different way? Yes. And the reason I apportion blame collectively is because this is our collective scenario, and it is our collective responsibility to serve and improve. We have become, in Britain, as the Financial Times stated not so long ago, a poor country with some very rich people. And how have we ended up there? We've ended up there by allowing the rewards of work to deplete and the cost of living to rise, principally in two areas: housing and energy. In housing, average house prices used to be roughly about 4 times average earnings in the UK for 80 years between the 1910s and the 1990s. This was a fixed characteristic of British society. Knuckle down, save for a few years, and buy in your late 20s. Simple. The ratio doubled in the space of a decade. The last time it was this high, cars had not been invented, and Queen Victoria was on the throne, and home ownership was the preserve of a wealthy minority, and we are heading to that position again. In terms of energy, it has been articulated by others. Yeah, we'll take.
Patrick Harvey.
Very grateful. Before he moves on from housing, I just wonder if he would agree that one of the things that has turbocharged that change toward ever more unaffordable housing is that a great deal of housing transferred into the private rented sector and is simply seen as a cash cow by those who own excess property. They own more property than they need, and that's massively increased the unaffordability of housing to the rest.
Ben Macpherson, give you the time back.
That inflation and the causes for which have been articulated is absolutely part of the picture which finds us now, where you have people who can amass credit and have availability of credit and can amass assets, and others who do not stand a hope, even in their midlife, of getting into a position of being able to own an asset. And that presents us with the challenge with rents that we're wrestling with right now as a Parliament. How do we continue to build, but also how do we address the fact that rents are continually, year on year, being a higher percentage of people's ratio in terms of their income? And it's not a matter of just supply and demand, because we have reached a position culturally that house prices and housing costs are expected to rise, and we need to get to a position of stabilisation, which is a difficult place to land. Energy, others have talked on, but in this situation, how we use devolved power, because that's all we have, as well as pushing for more power, how do we use devolved power to alleviate and support? And there has been bold and collective initiatives. Okay, yeah, sure. Quickly.
Briefly, Paul O'Kane.
Ben Macpherson is making a characteristically very interesting and thoughtful speech, but he said that devolved power is all we have. Would he not see the power of partnership between the UK Government and the Scottish Government on many of the issues that I raised in my speech, not least some of the innovations to take down bills and GB Energy?
Ben Macpherson.
So I do see the power of partnership, but what disappoints me from UK governments continuously is, given the extraordinary power of the UK Treasury, that there is not bold action to address the inequalities in both the housing market and the energy market. And the Scottish Government is so often left to pick up the pieces. And part of that is in social security. Now, we've talked a lot about social security in terms of support with incomes, and the child payment has made a massive impact, and other benefits that others have mentioned do too. But when it comes to disability benefits, I think there's a real problem in that the public discourse is already being led to a place that disability benefits are an area where savings need to be made. A lot of these people are on these disability benefits because of the pressure that's been applied to them through austerity. We have a growing demand for disability benefits, not through the fault of people, but through the fault of the conditions that have been manifested by political decisions, mostly at Westminster over the course of the last decades, and as well as international factors. But also, disability benefits, in terms of what the Scottish Government provides, are about giving people support for conditions they have. They're not linked to work. There's another debate about universal credit, but universal credit is failing. I had a constituent on Friday at my surgery who had worked all his life, paid into the system. I hear this again and again. He'd paid into the system. He'd hurt his hand. He worked in manual labour. He'd hurt his hand. He went to claim his universal credit for support so he could pay his rent. And you know what they said to him? You've got another hand at work, so you can't get universal credit. If we want to fix welfare, let's fix universal credit, but let's support those with disabilities and create a system where when people need it, they get the support that's required. Because only then can we make the case that work always pays. Work doesn't pay enough. It's not linked well enough with economic growth. When we had economic growth, we didn't have fair distribution. We didn't have high enough wages during the course of the 90s and the thousands. So, you know, this idea that disability benefits are fair game, I don't buy it. Disabled people need our help. If we want to make savings, we need to look elsewhere, or we need to raise money from the very few rich people in our, unfortunately, poor country in the UK.
Thank you. I now call the final speaker in the open debate, Fulton McGregor, up to 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. This debate this afternoon has taken place in the shadow of continued sustained pressures on the finances of all those who live in Scotland. The cost of living crisis, which we first had to contend with under a Tory government, has continued with the newly elected Labour government. The optimism that came with removing the Tories after 14 years of failure has quickly been replaced by a realisation that no matter what colour rosette they're wearing, those in power at Westminster will represent a harmful austerity agenda and seemingly endless cost of living crises for the people of Scotland. I have no doubt that every single member in this chamber here today hears weekly the concerns of constituents who are struggling to make ends meet. Just yesterday I met representatives from Hope to Help, who are a Coatbridge-based voluntary organisation. In the last 12 months they've helped residents across my constituency access approximately £4.6 million worth of benefits. That's money back into the local area. The people of this hard-working organisation are helping, are feeling stretched and are unsure what their financial future holds. And for the organisation themselves, like so many others, they're also feeling the strain, having just been rejected for grant funding from North Lanarkshire Council. Presiding Officer, during the UK general election campaign last year, we heard a lot of promises. Last summer we heard that Labour would cut energy bills by £300, but the energy price cap is about to rise for the third time, bringing the total number of increases up by nearly £300. We are living in one of the most energy-rich regions of Europe, yet under this UK government we are also paying some of the highest electricity costs in Europe. The word ironic doesn't even begin to cover it. Last summer we also heard Anas Sarwar promise voters that the two-child cap would be scrapped by Labour MPs. Instead they voted to keep it, choosing to keep thousands of Scottish children in poverty. The budget that this chamber recently passed was once again required to take mitigatory measures to shield those most vulnerable from economically punitive Westminster policies. Last summer we were told by Labour that our pensioners would be supported and no austerity would be introduced. Instead, the winter fuel payment was scrapped in record time as soon as Labour took power, a move further than even the Tories had went, and it's impacted nearly 1 million people in Scotland. And believe me, and I'll say this to my Labour colleagues, this has not went down well at all, with many, many constituents telling me in the days and weeks that followed this decision that firstly, they couldn't quite believe it, the level of betrayal, and secondly, that they were very much regretting their vote. And I think that Labour members know this to be the case. Of course, again, the Scottish Government have stood up to the plate and mitigated this unfair policy yet again with the pension age winter heating payment. Presiding Officer, there are also some pensioners who have been affected by the Labour UK Government's decision to reject independent recommendation and compensation for the WASPI women. We now know that almost a third of 1 million women in Scotland may have been affected by the DWP error, which meant they weren't notified of changes that concerned them. We saw Labour backing this campaign, promising justice and supporting campaigners. But once again, as soon as this Labour government attained office, the campaigners and those affected were simply left behind. With bill payers, parents and pensioners negatively affected since Labour took office, don't worry, business owners haven't been left out or ignored either. While Labour came to power on the promise of no taxes for working people, its decision to hike employers' national insurance contributions have forced businesses to face the impossible choice of cutting jobs, reducing hours, cutting wages, absorbing the costs themselves, or passing some of the burden to consumers in the form of higher prices. The Scottish Government estimates that the increase will cost businesses £850 per employee. Yes.
Briefly, Paul O'Kane.
Very grateful to Philip McGregor for taking an intervention. This is something I've been trying to ascertain from SNP members for some time. They have £5.2 billion extra to the Scottish budget as a result of the budgetary decisions taken by the UK, but they don't support a single measure in that budget. So what would Philip McGregor have done differently if it wasn't the national insurance increase?
Philip McGregor, I'll give you the time back.
What I don't support, I thank them for the intervention, what I don't support is that measure, the hike in national insurance. And as my colleague Willie Coffey pointed out earlier to Paul O'Kane, it's our money. We're not getting any favours from the UK Government. It's our money, and it's only a fraction of what we should be getting. So going back to the national insurance, I urge Labour to reconsider its decision, as it has the potential to cause serious lasting damage to Scotland's economy. Just today, I heard from the General Manager at Clark Fire Protection Products in Coatbridge, very good business. She confirmed that these measures have affected our company's pay reviews. She simply told me that the bottom line is that there is not as much money in the pot to share with employees. Again, it's workers that are paying the price. I've mentioned the list of failures which people across Scotland have seen in less than a year, but one of the most damaging legacies from Labour are private finance initiatives, PFI. Although these were introduced in the 90s by the Tories and continued under successive Labour governments many years ago, and only discontinued in 2018, there are now media reports indicating that the Chancellor is considering reintroducing them. And it's worth remembering how much a financial black hole these PFIs have inflicted on councils. Last month, North Lanarkshire Council set their budget for the year ahead, with the Labour-run council agreeing on a 10% council tax increase. However, a huge proportion of these council tax bills go towards paying for these PFI contracts. In North Lanarkshire next year, more than £31 million will be spent in PFIs. This represents more than a quarter of the total council tax that North Lanarkshire Council expect to receive. And this figure represents 1 year of paying PFI contracts. So as you can imagine, the total amount of money spent on PFIs since their introduction is truly astronomical. North Lanarkshire Council will ultimately pay back £729 million for schools built worth just a fraction of that amount. Within my constituency, 2 of these were the joint campus schools of Bargady and St Kevin's and Glenboig and Our Ladies and St Joseph's. And incredibly, North Lanarkshire Council are already having to build new schools again for St Kevin's and Glenboig, despite them opening less than 20 years ago. Thankfully, in 2007, the incoming SNP government put a stop on any new PFI contracts in Scotland, or the situation could be even more bleak. Presiding Officer, I appreciate I need to close. So, just in conclusion, we've heard a lot of promises during the UK general election campaign last year. In record time, we've now seen that these promises were worth very little when they had the power to act on them. The mitigatory steps that the Scottish Government has taken are once again underlining the need for Scotland to have total control over their own policies and finances, and we all know the only way to do that.
Thank you. We now move to wind-up speeches, and I call Patrick Harvie at 6 minutes. Mr Harvie.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I think a number of members have spoken very clearly with a focus on the impact of these issues on their constituents, and a number of members have done their very best from a range of different political perspectives to place this in a wider global context. I do just want to single out toward the end of the debate Ben Macpherson's speech, which I think was the most successful at combining the two. That global context and that long-term, multi-decade context of where some of these pressures have come from, as well as very clearly a focus on, at a practical level, how these issues impact on our constituents. In terms of that global context, obviously a part of it is around the multiple threats that are being posed at the moment by authoritarian regimes like Trump and Putin. And this goes beyond any specific measures that they may take, like kicking off a trade war, harmful though that clearly will be, destructive and unnecessary though it is. It's about the way in which they and the billionaire class whom they serve are being pretty open now, that they regard the continued plundering of the world's resources as fundamentally incompatible with democracy. I've believed that for a long time, but the super rich who want to continue that plunder are now having to face up to it. And they will choose plunder rather than democracy at every occasion. And that's the scale of the threat that we're facing. If we want to have even a decent chance that democracy is capable of surviving, then a fair redistribution of wealth is urgently needed if we're going to give people a reason to believe in it. Another part of the global context in which we're having these debates is, of course, the climate emergency and the very clear need that everybody who's spent 5 minutes understanding the science will get, the need to end our reliance on fossil fuels. And the cost of living crisis, as we've described it in recent years, was sparked off by a fossil fuel crisis. Russia's invasion of Ukraine forced this country and other European countries to recognise and acknowledge their over-reliance on fossil fuels, and not just those that directly imported gas through the pipeline from Russia, because that wholesale market set the prices even for those who produce gas domestically, and so the impact of the war in Ukraine, the invasion of Ukraine, on the fossil fuel economy impacted on everybody, including this country. And the artificial link that several members have referred to between gas prices and electricity prices in the UK, no reason to sustain that, no reason to continue it. It's an entirely artificial construct of the way the energy market is regulated in the UK. That means that even those who are switching to renewable electricity, the cheapest form of energy to generate, don't get the benefit of that cheap generation in the bills that they pay. As for those who recognise that we're behind where we should be, we're running behind schedule on climate, and they think the response should be to slow down action, I think that is simply at odds with reality. When you're running behind schedule, the only rational response is to speed up. And yes, it has to be a just transition, and no, so far it hasn't been, and the overwhelming reason for that is far too much power is in the hands of the private sector, of the billionaire class, of the kind of people who run these industries for their own benefit and stash the proceeds in tax havens. Taking back control. There was a slogan, a campaign that used that slogan just a few years ago. I wish to goodness that we had governments in this country that were willing to take back control from the billionaires, because that would be far more successful at achieving the benefit for the public and for the standard of living for most people than the actions that have been taken. Several people have talked about the potential for cooperation, and there is. I hope that there is potential for cooperation between Scottish and UK governments. And that issue that I'll come back to on energy pricing is one of the really positive areas where the opportunity could be there if both governments seize it. If the UK government changes that approach to regulating energy prices, and the Scottish government accelerates the transition away from fossil fuels, both for heat and transport, then we'll have a win-win situation where those who are supported to make that transition find that it's cheaper to do so, and governments find it more possible to give that support. I just wanted to unpack a little further some of the other issues as well. On rent, for example, Ben McPherson, I mentioned his speech earlier, was quite right to say that this is about the long-term increase in housing costs. That's gone on for decades. Any one of us can go online right now. If I look at the price that the flat I live in would sell for today, and what a mortgage would cost, and I compare that with what it would cost to rent that self-same flat, people who are forced to rent their home in the private rented sector are paying significantly more for less. They don't get full control of that property. They don't get the uplift in the property value over time. And they're paying back the private debt of the landlord who's able to service a repayment mortgage, not just an interest mortgage, by exploitative and extractive levels of rent. That's the rent that people are being forced to pay in communities right up and down the country. It should end, and the government's desire to connect even rent control areas to above inflation rent increases, that will entirely defeat the purposes of that. I know there's a great deal more that I could say, but I'll end by asking the Cabinet Secretary in closing once again to give us some explanation. Where is the Heat in Buildings Bill? What has been happening to it since November when it was supposed to be introduced, and when will we see it?
Thank you. I now call Sarah Boyack. Up to 7 minutes, Ms Boyack.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I think this has been a really important debate on how we can best help the people of Scotland with their bills, but also we need to make sure that every government is doing the maximum it can to actually impact on those bills. And I thought, as Paul O'Kane, Faisal Chowdhury and my colleague Mark Griffin said, the SNP can blame the UK government all they want, but there are so many powers that they have that could make tangible differences to the cost of living crisis, and they have been in power for 18 years. Meanwhile, Labour has been in power for just over 8 months, and we are starting to make the difference. The comprehensive review of Ofgem, empowering it to facilitate growth, innovation and become a stronger champion. I'm responding to the debate, Ben McPherson. I did hear your speech. I might come back to it. Encouraging it to champion our consumers. Also, the focus on community renewables and community benefits, and actually enabling renewables in England. But also critical issues, increasing the state pension rate and retaining the triple lock, increasing the living wage. And this week's announcement about the upcoming planning and infrastructure bill actually giving households who are experiencing new or upgraded energy transmission infrastructure getting discounts on their bills. So practical measures. And I want to just finish on this one. Capping the amount that can be, no I won't, capping the amount that can be deducted from universal credit payments while repaying short-term loans and debts, saving 1.2 million of the poorest families in the UK, an average of 420 a year on average. So there's targeted measures, both in the energy sector, but also support households. And I think if we look in Scotland, over half the Scottish homes we have are not meeting energy efficiency standards. They're below recommended levels. And we are seeing energy being wasted, heat being wasted, and that's pushing bills up for people as well. They're paying for heat they shouldn't have to pay for. And we should be better insulating our homes, using renewable energy solutions such as solar or heat pumps, and that will actually impact on people's bills, and that's something the Scottish Government has the power to do. So insulating homes should be at the heart of tackling this issue. And the Warm Home Scheme has only delivered just over 14,000 installations by the end of 23-24, and yet 861,000 households are deemed to be in fuel poverty. So there's way more that could be done. Could some legislation fix that? Well, on the 8th of March, no, I'm just going to respond to the points that Patrick Harvey made. On the 8th of March, it was 1 year since the consultation of the Heat and Buildings Bill closed, and we have still got no bill published. So it would be good to hear a timescale on that. Also good to hear a timescale on the energy strategy and the Just Transition Plan. So we need to see action and we need to see investment. But this year, even having got that £5.2 billion extra, the SNP cut the energy efficiency and decarbonisation budget by just under 5% in real terms. And there was £47 million which could have been created, jobs in our communities. Willie Rennie talked about jobs. Well, last week was Apprenticeship Week. There's a massive missed opportunity in our communities to give people jobs and make people's homes energy efficient. So we're seeing underperformance. No, I've said I'm going to move on to respond to the debate. There could have been more. The Cabinet Secretary, I'm responding to the Cabinet Secretary speech, she actually opened the debate this afternoon, and there was lots of talk about what could be done. There was talk about housing. Let's just look at housing. We could be seeing way more on housing. And you saw that in the UK budget, 3.1 billion on affordable housing, and I declare a register of interest. We have seen nothing like the action to tackle the housing emergency we now have in Scotland. That's both more affordable social housing, it's also addressing the issue of thousands of empty homes. Oh, I'll take an intervention, yes, somebody.
Cabinet Secretary.
For taking the intervention. Does Sarah Boyack not recognise the investment that's been made in affordable housing over many years in Scotland dwarfs that of the investment made in England by the UK government, including the figure that she's just cited? Dwarfs it.
Sarah Boyack.
My point is, you've had 14 years of a Tory government. In our first budget, presiding officer, that investment was prioritised for affordable social housing, and yet we have an affordable housing crisis in Scotland. Cabinet Secretary also talked about free bus travel. It is fantastic. I introduced the over 60s, under 22s, fantastic, but as we've said before, if there isn't a bus to use it on, it's not much use, so we're seeing a loss of affordable buses. And several colleagues have talked about the millions of journeys that our constituents were able to make when peak fares were abolished. But now they're being reintroduced, so there are many people that will not be able to afford the train. So we have got a problem. It's about energy, it's about people's homes, it's about what more could be done. And I would say to colleagues, the Labour government is now interested in both short and long-term solutions to the problems the people of Scotland are facing. One thing that was mentioned by Paul O'Kane in his opening remarks was the fact that the £150 warm home discount scheme, which will provide help to an extra 220,000 households across Scotland, is on top of the £41 million for funding for the 2024 winter that's just passed to give vital assistance to our constituents. And we're investing in the long term. The investment in making sure that we have a grid, sustainable, cheaper energy, a more long-term approach to making sure we get the investment we need for baseload and renewables. Long-term and short-term solutions are critical. One thing that's not been mentioned by most members is renewable heating solutions. We've got so many opportunities in Scotland. One of the things that struck me from the discussion we've been having is we need to focus on what can actually happen, and we need to make sure that that links into people's bills. For Scotland to remain a lead figure in the transition to net zero, we need both to react to the rising cost of living pressures, but also actually do the heavy lifting, make sure we actually see the benefits that our constituents will experience. This is a debate about energy bills, the cost of living crisis, and we need to look at what more the SNP government can do now, rather than grandstanding, blaming the UK government when it's actually getting to work in the areas. We don't need warm words, we need action. The people of Scotland deserve better, and let's see it going forward.
Thank you. I can advise the Chamber we have exhausted all the time in hand, and with that I call Douglas Lumsden up to 8 minutes.
Thank you, President Officer. It's maybe a warning. Well, this has been an interesting, if somewhat predictable debate. The motion from the Government today is a shameful attempt to deflect all responsibility away from them. But let us remember that we are seeing inflation-busting council tax rises because of their financial mismanagement. And of course, in the motion we have the usual attempt to pat themselves on the back. And we have Labour's amendment that makes me think they're living on a different planet. And the string of broken promises that we've seen from them over the last 6 months should just be brushed aside, a point that Stephen Kerr made. No wonder they were too ashamed to take interventions. Because in the run-up to the general election, Labour promised change. But I don't think our pensioners were expecting change to mean that their winter fuel payments being snatched from them a couple of months after they came in. And I don't think our farmers were expecting change to mean a family farm tax that would see many have to sell parts of their business to survive. And I don't think businesses thought change would be a tax on jobs as national insurance was hiked. And I don't think households were expecting the promise of lower energy bills, £300 a year by the end of the term, would actually mean bills going up. But that is exactly what we have. I have spoken regularly of GB Energy being a sham. We were promised lower bills, but bills are rising. Aberdeen was promised 1,000 jobs, but now we're being told it may be 200 jobs by 2029, if we are lucky. And only last week it was reported that the Treasury were lining up spending cuts to GB Energy, a point made by Graham Simpson. And to be honest, I'm not surprised the Treasury officials are probably like the rest of us, are totally confused by what GB Energy actually is. No wonder they seem to be struggling to hire a chief executive. They probably can't agree on a job description. Now, while I'm not averse to the devolved government pointing out the failings of the Westminster Labour government, they cannot pull the wool over the eyes of the Scottish public to their own failings. Pointing the finger at someone else does not absolve you of the guilt of failed policies and abandoned communities like the North East. We're still waiting on a just transition plan and energy strategy from the government. We're still waiting for them to meet their environmental targets. We're still waiting for them to tell us how they are going to meet our long-term energy needs without being reliant on imported oil and gas. And as much of a farce that GB Energy is, at least Labour government have actually set it up. Not sure what it is, but it is set up. Unlike the state-owned Scottish energy company announced by the SNP in 2017, that is now not spoken about and quietly ditched, it seems. Or the Scottish Government's bonds that Hamza Yousaf announced in this place. Another grand announcement quietly dropped in the hope that no one was looking. They are a government that is out of ideas and out of time. They need to focus on the basics. They need to focus on growing the economy. Liz Smith says that we get criticised for being obsessed with economic growth, but we are right to bang on about it. It's essential because it leads to more jobs, more money for our public services, better education, more opportunities and lower poverty. It should be at the heart of everything this devolved government does, because without it, we are in a downward spiral. Without the growth, this devolved government have backed themselves into a corner of higher taxes, lower productivity and less money for public services. We need to break that cycle. And this is why it's criminal that this devolved government are turning their backs on well-paid jobs and tax revenues by the demonising of the oil and gas sector. Paul O'Kane talks about energy security, but we have a Labour government who are forcing through a ban without a plan with their no new licences, and we have the devolved government with a presumption against new oil and gas. Because while we have a need for hydrocarbons, why on earth would we shoot ourselves in the foot by not using our own domestic supply? That is not good for our jobs, not good for our economy, not good for our energy security, and not good for the environment. Looking at some of the contributions we've had today, the Cabinet Secretary spoke about existing housing, getting that back into use. Now, I completely agree. Voids have been a problem for years, but this has been caused by the lack of funding for local government. They are linked. And we often hear talk about how well local government is funded. But if that is the case, why are we seeing inflation-busting council tax rises? Patrick Harvie spoke about the Heat and Buildings Bill. And he's right, we deserve to know what has happened to that bill. Has it been dropped? We need some honesty from the government. I thought Fergus Ewan made a very important contribution. Our power is too expensive, and our manufacturing base just can't be competitive with it, a point that was also raised by Graham Simpson. Highest industry energy costs that could be pushed to consumers fuels inflation. But I do agree that it's not as easy as just breaking the link between gas and electric pricing. You know, if that was the case, I'm sure it would have been done already. Willie Rennie spoke about economic inactivity. Yes, of course.
Fergus Ewing, briefly.
Does Mr Lumsden also agree that there are only sufficient storage capacity of gas for 7 winter days, 7 bad winter days, as opposed to 89 in Germany? And without further investment in a UK gas industry, there won't be the incentive to invest in increasing that gas storage, because there will be no purpose. And therefore, the risk of the lights going out in Britain is very serious.
Douglas Lumsden.
No, I completely agree. We should be investing more into gas, and I would like to see the Peterhead Power Station new gas plant being built. That link to Acorn, I'm sure we all, well, most of us all would want, would be a good step forward. Willie Rennie spoke about economic activity. Work is good, so let's help them. Point to NHS waiting lists and adding to the problem. A point also made by Paul O'Kane and also by Bob Doris. Willie Rennie also point for grants for home efficiency and heat pumps. It is just so difficult, and I think that's something that all of us hear. Faisal Chowdhury, I tried to raise a couple of interventions asking him when GB Energy would reduce bills by £300 and why pensioners would ever trust the Labour Party again, so maybe it was a good thing that he never took the intervention. In conclusion, Presiding Officer, I have sat through the debate today wishing and hoping for some clarity from the Scottish Government on what solutions they are offering the people of Scotland. I should have known better. Instead, they've come with political grievance and point scoring. So let me outline the policy of the only party in Scotland with common sense proposals to some of the issues that have been discussed today. Only the Scottish Conservatives will cut income tax to 19% for every taxpayer earning up to £43,000 per year. Only the Scottish Conservatives will exempt all pubs and restaurants for paying business rates. Only the Scottish Conservatives will cut taxes for house buyers by raising the point at which you start paying tax on house purchases to £250,000. Only the Scottish Conservatives will protect our oil and gas sector and the vital role they play and will continue to play in providing affordable energy to our homes, communities and country for many years to come. And only the Scottish Conservatives will put money back into your pockets, ensuring a growing, vibrant economy and stop these left-wing radical policies from this out-of-touch, out-of-ideas, out-of-time Scottish Government. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
Thank you, Mr Lumsden. I now call on Gillian Martin to wind up the debate. Cabinet Secretary, I'd be grateful if you could take us up to just before 5 o'clock.
I almost don't know where to start, because I've just written something down, which is, what would people who've been watching this debate, who are maybe really finding it difficult to pay their bills, or maybe feeling that their money's just not stretching as far as it would, what would they make of the contributions that people have made today? Would they think that this is the sort of place where solutions are going to be arrived at? Would they think that this is the sort of place where we could all get together in a room and we could actually come up with plans on how we can all work together throughout maybe, both devolved governments like our own, the UK government, but could we work cross-party? And what would be the ratio, perhaps, of solutions that people have brought forward in relation to insults and point scoring? And just as I wrote that, I was called a left-wing radical. And I just thought, what would the people... Douglas Lumsden, he does a good line in tabloid headlines. But is there much in there that actually would have anybody sitting at home who were worried that there was a plan from him, and in particular, and his benches, for them to think, well, I'll vote Conservative because they've got a plan? Would they also have confidence that he and I could sit down and thrash out our differences on perhaps energy policy, but arrive to a place in which people could actually feel that there's going to be meaningful change? I'll take this, Douglas Lumsden.
Douglas Lumsden, briefly.
Secretary, for giving way. Maybe if this government removed their presumption against new oil and gas, we could actually work together.
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, here's the thing, though, because presumption against, and I won't go too much into this, presumption against is two words. Behind the energy policy that we have, behind the energy policy that Labour have, behind the energy policy colleagues in the Greens and Lib Dems have, there's more nuance than that. There's more discussion about it. It's not about two words. It's about what you do and how you support people. It's about the money that you put forward to support people. It's about the £500 million, perhaps, that this government gives to the supply chain to help them fill their order book with renewables as well as oil and gas. It's about the training programmes that we put in place for people to upskill so that they can take advantage of new jobs if they're worried about the fact that their company might be leaving the North Sea because it's not economical to produce anymore. All these things. I won't take your intervention because I feel like it would just be going back to Victorian Britain. Where people like me didn't do terribly well. What I want to do is I want to set out some of the things, and I want to set out the stall of some of the things that I think that genuinely would make a difference. And I don't think there's any silver bullet. I think there's a combination of things. And this is why some of the contributions that people made brought forward ideas and reflections. I would say Fergus Ewing very much did that, Ben Macpherson did that. But here's some of the reflections that I've got. So, decoupling the cost of gas and electricity is a start. It's a start because the more renewable electricity we generate, the cheaper it will be. And then more people will make the decision to heat their homes potentially with electricity, to drive an electric car, to change over. Companies will locate themselves here, perhaps, and have high-intensity industries that will provide more jobs. Because as long as it is volatile and attached to gas, and the geopolitical aspects of that were mentioned by people like Mark Griffin, it's going to be a false link, and it's going to be something that people can't see any kind of certainty in. But that's just for starters. The social tariff for vulnerable customers will make a difference right now. if that was implemented within this year, within this financial year, it would be the biggest game changer in terms of the vulnerable people that have racked up monumental debt, which they will never be able to pay back, and which is actually costing the utilities companies lots of money to try and recover. So a social tariff is something that is actually, we've had good feedback from the utilities companies about the social tariff. We've had a working group that's been working for quite a long time, and we're producing the report, which I think was mentioned by Marie McNair, and it's going to be offered to the UK Government, because we've done the work in showing how a social tariff could work, and we've got a lot of people across, lots of stakeholders across lots of sectors, including the utility companies, that are backing for this. That is a thing that would make a significant difference for people in poverty. The standing charges reform. So at the moment, Scotland and North Wales pay the highest standing charges. The lowest standing charges are in the south east of England and in London. Well, the last time I looked, we generated quite a lot of the electricity in Scotland, and we've been a bit of a powerhouse with regards to energy. And no, I've already taken an intervention from Mr Lumsden, so I won't bother, thank you. So the standing charges at the moment are skewed towards the areas that got the highest population, and let's face it, probably the most votes. So, yes, I will.
Liz Smith.
Just ask the Cabinet Secretary if she agrees with zonal pricing.
Cabinet Secretary.
I've left this zonal pricing or variations on that because I don't think it's either or. What we can't have is the status quo. I'm absolutely convinced on that. But I'm yet to be convinced that some of the proposals on zonal pricing is the silver bullet that people are actually saying that it is. And the reason why is I think that there's actually a number of different interventions that can be made at one time. What we don't want to do is put off investment in renewables in Scotland, and that's been one of the dangers that's been flagged up by zonal pricing. But at the same time, I want to make sure that zonal pricing, the impact it would have on actual consumers, would be significant enough for us to go down that road. Now, I've heard £40 to £100 a year off of electricity bills. That's not enough. That's not enough in itself. That's not really going to make a difference. And I do worry that perhaps some of the arguments around zonal pricing is maybe promising a little bit too much. But I think there's definitely something in there in rebalancing the type of markets that we have. And I certainly think there's something in there in making sure that people in parts of the countries, the foreign nations of the UK that are generating fuel or that are transmitting electricity should have a discount of some type for that, because I think that's a real pressing issue that is really upsetting quite a lot of people. So I started to sit in the fence on that, but it really is something that I need to understand an awful lot more about and what alternatives there are. That's why I'm laying out. But what I also want to see is significant community benefit intervention, which perhaps is more than the way that Liz Smith led me to discuss. Because those communities that are hosting infrastructure and developments, they are not getting enough in terms of community benefit. And I would like to see community benefit also be having a stake in those developments, being helped to have their own community energy scheme by those companies that are working in their areas, and seeing money coming right into their communities. And I'll take Fergus Ewing.
Fergus Ewing.
Grateful to the Cabinet Secretary. I'm delighted to hear that she supports communities having a stake. As I argued last week, community ownership would provide benefits of a level of massive greater magnitude than just a cheque. And would she work with the Labour government? There must be a will to deliver this, and deliver this quickly, before any more projects are finalised, without this even being a possibility.
Cabinet Secretary.
The answer is absolutely yes, and more than that, I'm already working with the UK Government on it. One of the first discussions that I had with Michael Shanks on this was around some of the funding that was coming from GB Energy actually been put into our community and renewable energy scheme, which is actually out the door with demand and to increase the capacity. So I think I said to Michael Shanks, don't reinvent the wheel here. We've got a really good vehicle for this, and we've got more people actually want to have community energy. But one of the great things about CARES is that they've taken a lot of the difficulty out for communities and actually setting up their own community energy. You almost had to have people who were the experts in this to be able to do it. So I want to see more of that happening, but also want to see the procuring power of those developers as well. The procuring power of those developers is significant. So they can effectively be saying, would you like a community energy scheme? We'll build it, we'll fund it, it's yours. And then I think that a lot of the things will melt away. I would really like to take Willie Rennie. Can I mention you instead? Can I mention Willie Rennie instead? Because I enjoyed Willie Rennie's speech, and I have to say that you've talked about mental health, and it really made me think about the level of debt that's associated with fuel poverty being a real exacerbator of mental health. And also I wanted to mention the area-based schemes. I've made sure, and I haven't just made sure, I protected the money going into area-based schemes in my discussions around the budget and in Warmer Homes Scotland, but we've actually increased the money on the area-based schemes. The reason being the area-based schemes are actually turning more houses faster into the kind of energy efficient homes that they should be, but we're also again out the door with demand. So that's an area which is actually going really far. I'm going to use my last 20 seconds to say something about the Heat and Buildings Bill, because I'm going to be upfront with people. I'm going to introduce a Heat and Buildings Bill when I can be satisfied that those interventions within it will decrease fuel poverty at the same time as decarbonising houses. At the moment, I do not feel that the drafting that was done, with the greatest respect to Patrick Harvey, took that significantly into consideration. There are so many moving parts here. I am going to craft a bill that is going to simultaneously reduce carbon and tackle fuel poverty. And until I can do that, I'm afraid there will not be a bill put forward in its current form, drafted form, because at the moment
the Cabinet Secretary must conclude.